Hello, good morning, and welcome to this Coordinators Day for Horizon Europe Grant Management. My name is Peter Hertwig. I am a head of unit in the European Commission's Directorate General for Research and Innovation. The title of my unit is the Common Service for Business Processes. I will guide you through the first part of the session today, and then my colleague Manuel Romariz will take over for the second part. So this webinar today is addressed in the first instance to coordinators, but also to beneficiaries of ongoing grants in Horizon Europe. And we will give you information and guidance on how to manage your grant, in particular from the administrative side. So we will have first a session dealing with amendments to your grant agreements that might be possible for one or the other reason. Then we will have a second session on reporting and payments, covering both the technical scientific reporting and the more administrative part, and of course the cost claims and payments. And finally, we will have a short presentation on the so-called mutual insurance mechanism that is also a part of our Horizon Europe grants. For each of these three sessions, we will have a questions and answers part. The questions and answers, or the questions, will be sent to us via Slido. So you have in the events page the code for Slido. So we would ask you immediately, even now, to go and open a browser window and go to Slido and start putting in your questions. You should also watch a bit the Slido list of questions developing, and then if you see that there are questions that interest you too, instead of repeating these questions and asking them yourself, just upvote the question that you are interested in. And then for each question and answer session, we will go through the list of questions in the number of order of likes, so that we have time to reply at least to the most popular questions. So much on the introduction. We will now go into the first session on the amendments that will cover, to start with, two presentations. One presentation on the more legal basis part of it, and one presentation on the actual process flows. The first presentation is actually a recorded video, so that is not live today. But the second part is then a live presentation by my colleague Agnese Boscarol, who is here with me. And I think without further ado, we can start this first presentation on the legal basis for the amendments.
So, my name is Isabelle Leroy, and I work in the Common Legal Support Service. I will share my slides to walk you through, excuse me, I'm going to start from the beginning, to walk you through the legal provisions on amendments. And here we're talking about amendments to your grant agreement. So from the legal perspective, what is an amendment? It's basically a change to your grant agreement. The grant agreement is the contractual document that is signed between the beneficiaries on one side and the granting authority on the other side. The granting authority may be, for instance, the European Commission or an executive agency such as REA or ERCEA, or a joint undertaking. And the grant agreement lays down the rights and obligations of the beneficiaries in respect of the grant, and other aspects such as the subject of the grant, its duration, how much money you can get, at which conditions. But we will see that you cannot change everything in your grant agreement. There will be two parts in my presentation. The first one is on conditions and procedures, and then we'll see frequent cases of changes that you may encounter during the lifetime of your action. And about conditions and procedure, so legal basis is in the Article 39 of your grant agreement, where there is one paragraph laying down the conditions and a second paragraph laying down the procedure. Now the key features. First of all, what can you change in your grant agreement? You need to know that, and maybe you know that your grant agreement is based on a template, which is common to all grants across the board. And you may know that it goes beyond Horizon Europe. It's a template which is used for all the grants under Horizon Europe and even for grants under the other EU funding programs. And this template is adopted by a Commission decision, so the text and the provisions of this template is standard and it cannot be modified. So it needs to be clear that the general terms and conditions in the grant agreement cannot be modified. So what can be changed in your grant agreement? Well, it is specific to your project. So that's specific data to your actions, such as, for example, the duration of the reporting periods, or maybe changes related to beneficiaries. And you may know that these specific aspects, you can find them specifically in a new part of the grant agreement, which is called the data sheet, that you find at the beginning of your grant agreement. But you cannot change everything in the data sheet. And I can already underline at this point that something that you cannot do is you cannot increase the maximum grant amount, which is the maximum amount payable for your grant. And there's other aspects that can be changed because they are specific to your grant. It's in the annexes to your grant agreement, and specifically annexes 1 and 2, which are the description of the action and your estimated budget. Now that we know the parts or the aspects that can be changed, let's see to what extent you can make a change via an amendment. And there are legal limitations to what you can do. And notably, you cannot make changes that would call into question the decision that was made to award the grant. And this means that if you request an amendment, by an amendment to introduce a feature in your grant, and if we had known this feature at the time of the evaluation or selection, and then we would have not selected your grant due to this feature, then you cannot introduce the feature later on via an amendment. To make this more clear, if, for example, you are requesting to change the actions, the tasks quite a lot in a way that would make your project fall out of the topic under which it was selected, well, we cannot accept such type of amendment. Another example is there are minimum conditions to participate in Horizon Europe actions. Notably for multi-beneficiary actions, the minimum conditions are usually to have one entity in a member state and 2 other entities in another member state and/or associated country. So if your consortium is just 3 legal entities fulfilling these minimum conditions, you cannot make an amendment that would remove 1 beneficiary, because then you would fall to 2 partners in your consortium that would be below the minimum conditions. Another legal limitation that restricts the amendments that you can make is that you cannot make an amendment that would breach the principle of equal treatment between beneficiaries. That's also a reason why we cannot make changes to the general terms and conditions in the grant agreement. Otherwise, the beneficiaries would have different general terms and conditions and would not be treated equally. And finally, your amendments also need to comply with the legal framework of Horizon Europe, and that's notably the rules for participation of Horizon Europe. Also, the financial regulation, which is the European regulation laying down the rules of the budget. For example, in this regulation, there's a rule that same cost cannot be reimbursed twice by the EU budget. So you cannot make an amendment that would breach that rule. And finally, your amendment also needs to comply with the rest of the grant agreement, and notably these general terms and conditions that cannot be modified. I will also give you an example here. In Article 7 of your grant agreement, you have a list of tasks of the coordinator. that cannot be delegated to another beneficiary or third party. And this concerns the tasks which are really specific to the coordinator's role as the interlocutor of the granting authority, like, for example, the tasks of submitting the reports or distributing the payment. So these cannot be delegated, this task, and you cannot make an amendment to delegate them, to have them delegated to another beneficiary or third party. Okay, so that was what can be changed and to what extent. Now, who can make the change? So in the grant agreement, you have two parties, the beneficiaries on one side, the granting authority on the other. So an amendment can be requested by any of the two parties, well, usually by any of the two parties, but in practice, it will be most often the consortium who will make the request for an amendment. And when amendment is requested by the consortium, in practice, it will be signed and submitted by the coordinator. The coordinator has this capacity, and notably because the other beneficiaries have accepted that the coordinator can sign and submit an amendment on their behalf. And they have accepted this when signing the accession form, where there is this provision for accepting that the coordinator can submit amendments. So the general rule is that the coordinator submit the amendments, but there is an exception to this rule, and that's in the situation where there is a request for an amendment from the consortium to replace the coordinator, but without its agreement. This is not a nice situation to encounter, but if ever it happens, what is foreseen is that another beneficiary would then be appointed on behalf of the rest of the consortium and submit the amendment. And now about how to make the amendment. I will not go too much into details because this will be the subject of the next presentation, but basically it's fully electronic, done on the Funding and Tenders Opportunities portal and in writing. Of course, nothing in oral stands for an amendment. And then basically, so there's one party requesting the amendment, which is usually from the side of the consortium. Then the receiving party has 45 days to assess and accept or reject the amendment. And the amendment is either explicitly accepted or rejected, but there's no tacit approval. Still from the side of the procedure, so what needs to be indicated in your amendment? We need to know the reasons justifying the amendment, and we need to have documents supporting your amendment. So just a few examples. So for example, if your amendment is a request to add an affiliated entity, an affiliated entity is a type of third party which has a legal link with a beneficiary. Well, you will have to provide as a supporting document proof of this legal link with a beneficiary. Another specific case in terms of the supporting documents is the amendment where you request a change of the coordinator without its agreement. I already mentioned this on the last slide. And so we've already seen that this amendment would need to be submitted by another beneficiary, exceptionally, not by the coordinator. But in terms of supporting document, you would have to provide supporting documents proving first that there was a decision of the consortium to replace the coordinator, then also proving that the beneficiary who submits the amendment has been appointed on behalf of the rest of the consortium to submit this amendment. And finally, also a document indicating in writing the opinion of the coordinator who is being replaced, or proving that you have requested this opinion in writing. Now, this is the timeline of the procedure to make amendments. I will just highlight a few aspects from the legal perspective, and it's a timeline for an amendment that would have been requested by the consortium. First, amendments need to be done usually before the end of the action, and that makes sense. For example, you're not going to change a beneficiary after the end of the action. However, there are some situations where we can make amendments after the end of the action, and I'll give you an example. For instance, the action is finished, but we realize after that the coordinator has gone bankrupt, and that's not a nice situation, but that's why we have legal rules to help for these types of situations. So in this case, we would still need to make the final payment. And as you know, the final payments are paid to the coordinator, who then distributes the payment to the consortium. So we would need to have a coordinator that is not bankrupt, and we could still make an amendment to replace the coordinator after the end of the action. Then still about the timeline. So the coordinator, when it prepares, thinks about an amendment or is considering this with the consortium, a best practice is that if you have a doubt whether or not you need an amendment, you should contact your project officer in charge of the grant and discuss this with the project officer, so that you go in the right direction of knowing whether or not you need an amendment. Then the amendment is prepared and submitted by the coordinator. But the coordinator cannot just do what it wants. It has to act in accordance with the consortium agreement, which is your internal arrangement to the consortium. And that's why we say that a consortium agreement is very important to have a smooth implementation of your action. And it needs to contain the process for you to make a decision. So the decision-making process, for example, to make an amendment. The coordinator will make all the preparations for the amendments in the funding portal, and then we insist that before pushing the button and signing and submitting the amendment request, it has to submit at the stage before this, submit the draft amendment to the granting authority for an informal assessment. Then the granting authority will just consider if the request is correct, and then provide the feedback to the coordinator. And then after that, if it's correct, the coordinator can sign and submit. And then the granting authority will make the formal assessment. It will have 45 days to make this assessment. This deadline can be extended exceptionally. That's mainly if an amendment is particularly complex, or, for example, if we need to make a review of the action. For instance, if your request is to change the action tasks and we need to make a review to assess this. And then the granting authority will either explicitly accept or reject, but there is no tacit approval. And on your side, you can withdraw the amendment, but only up until the moment when we sign the grant agreement. And from the legal perspective, we're interested in the time of signatures. So you see that the coordinator signs and submits before submitting to the granting authority for the formal assessment, and the granting authority signs after the formal assessment. Now, these signatures will trigger the entry into force of the amendment. So actually, it's the day when the last of the two parties signs the amendment that it enters into force, as usually the amendment is requested by the consortium. So this is the day when the granting authority signs the amendment. Then there is another notion, which is the moment when the amendment takes effect. And there's two possibilities. So that's the moment when the changes in your grant agreement start to apply. Two possibilities: either it's a date that has been agreed between the parties, and so you have thought of putting that in your amendment. This could be important, for example, as it can have an effect on the eligibility of cost. For example, if your amendment is to add a beneficiary, well, you can agree and put in your amendment that the amendment will take effect at the date when the new beneficiary signed the accession form. And if there is no agreement, or you have not put into your amendment request a specific date for taking effect, then the amendment will take effect on the date of entry into force. And for those of you who have managed to follow, the date of entry into force is the date of the last of the two signatures of the amendment. Okay, so we finished with the procedure. So now we're going to see some cases of when an amendment is necessary or not. And so for this, what you need to keep in mind is that an amendment is a change to any of the provisions or anything that is written in your grant agreement and its annexes. First, we're going to see here a list of cases when an amendment is necessary. So first, you have changes that concern or are related to the beneficiaries. One of these changes, for example, the addition or the removal of a beneficiary. Now, more precisely about the removal of a beneficiary, in legal terms, we call this the termination of the participation of a beneficiary, which is a bit sounds a bit radical, but that's the legal term. This removal of the beneficiary can be requested from the side of the consortium or from the side of the granting authority. And if it's requested by the consortium, it can be requested at the request of the concerned beneficiary or at the request of the rest of the consortium. But in any case, it will have to be submitted by the coordinator, as we have seen. And concerning the procedure, there's a little change compared to the previous framework program Horizon 2020, for those who were familiar with it. Because under Horizon 2020, when you were asking for the removal of a beneficiary, the coordinator had to notify this to the granting authority and combine this notification with a request for an amendment. And this has been simplified under Horizon Europe because there's no notification anymore, and it's straight away the process of an amendment. Something that you need to keep in mind when you are considering the removal of a beneficiary is that beneficiaries in the consortium are jointly responsible for the technical implementation of the action. This means that they are responsible together to fully implement the project and without any additional funding to do so. So if ever a beneficiary is removed, the rest of the consortium must find a solution to carry out the project. So in practice, this means that for this type of amendment, we will have to see how you reallocate the tasks. For example, reallocate them to the remaining part of the consortium, or if you add a new beneficiary to take over the tasks of the defaulting beneficiary. And we have to see how which changes you propose to the Annex 1, which is the description of the action, and to the Annex 2, which is the estimated budget. So other changes that concern beneficiaries is, for instance, okay, you can add a beneficiary. There's also what we call a partial takeover of a beneficiary. So that's when a beneficiary is, for example, subject to a partial acquisition, and there are the rights and obligations of the initial legal entity is taken over by a new legal entity, but the initial legal entity, initial beneficiary, continues to exist. Well, then we will have to make an amendment to add the new legal entity who has taken over the rights and obligations under the grant agreement and see if the initial beneficiary needs to be removed. And other changes that concerns also the composition of the consortium is, for instance, the addition or removal of certain types of third parties, and that's notably the affiliated entities or the associated partners, because these types of third parties have the name written in the grant agreement. So if there is a change, the grant agreement needs to be updated. Now, other changes that need an amendment are the changes that concern the coordinator. So we've already seen amendments to change the coordinator. There's another type of change that can concern the coordinator. It's changes to the bank account of the coordinator. And there we need an amendment because the bank account of the coordinator is specified in the grant agreement, in the data sheet actually. And that's because it's the bank account where we make the payments. So if there is a change to this bank account, and more precisely a change to the number or IBAN of the bank account, then the grant agreement needs to be updated, and this requires then an amendment. And then another big chunk of the changes that require an amendment are changes that would concern the description of the action or the allocation of tasks. So that may happen if you encounter changes of condition and you need to carry out your project in a slightly different manner. However, you need to keep in mind that the changes that you may request to the description of your action will not necessarily be accepted by the granting authority. And in this respect, I will recall you the legal limitations that I previously explained to the amendments that can be accepted, notably that an amendment cannot call into question the decision that was taken to award your grant. It cannot breach the principle of equal treatment between beneficiaries. It cannot have the amendment cannot have an effect that you would no longer comply with the selection, the criteria for eligibility or selection. And also your amendment needs to comply with the legal framework of Horizon Europe. Now we will go to the type of changes where an amendment is not required. And here, something that's interesting to understand is budget flexibility. So for budget flexibility, I will be talking about mainly the grants which reimburse actual costs. So that's real costs that beneficiaries actually incur and report in their reporting period, and on the basis of which they are reimbursed. And I will not be talking about the lump sums. So budget flexibility is something that allows, it's based on the fact that your budget, which is in Annex 2 of the grant agreement, is only an estimation. And it means that in practice, you can transfer budget from one beneficiary to another or to an affiliated entity. And you can also transfer budget between budget categories. And that's between most budget categories, because you have to be careful with certain budget categories, notably subcontracting, and also specific cost categories that you find in the column D of your budget, because when these categories, then when you touch them, there's often a need for an amendment. But apart from that, there is this budget flexibility, which means that in practice, let's say that, for instance, in the first reporting period, the one beneficiary had incurred less costs than estimated. Well, it can transfer costs to another of its budget category or to another beneficiary. And in practice, it will do this by reporting costs which are different from what was indicated in the estimated budget, and by providing an explanation in the report. One big limit to budget flexibility is that you cannot increase the maximum grant amount, and this you cannot do either with an amendment. You cannot increase the maximum grant amount. Now, another type of change that does not require an amendment is the changes which are minor, like the name of a participant or its address. And this you can do simply by making the change in the participant register. Now you have what we call a universal takeover. Okay, so this is not a very transparent term. I explained on the previous slide that if a beneficiary is partially taken over by a legal entity, then you have to make an amendment. But in the case where the takeover is not partial but total, and we call this a universal takeover, which means that all the rights and obligations of the initial legal entity are transferred to another legal entity, in the case, for example, of a full acquisition, and the initial legal entity ceases to exist, then we usually don't require an amendment, and it's usually sufficient to register the update in the participant register. And now that the last point is a change in the bank account. So this time, I mentioned on the previous slide that if you are changing the number or IBAN of the bank account of the coordinator, then this requires an amendment. But if you are making another type of change, and notably, for instance, the name of the bank or the branch address, so there the amendment would not be required, and again, it would be normally sufficient to make the change in the participant register. Now, This was just a quick oversight of the frequent changes, but again, if you encounter a situation where you consider a change and you're not sure whether or not you need to make an amendment, the best practice is that your coordinator discuss this with the project officer so that you get the idea whether or not you need to launch an amendment procedure. And that was it for my part. I thank you for your attention. And just to let you know that we will publish further guidance on amendments, and this will be made available in the on the Funding and Tenders portal under the page of reference documents, which is the page where you can find the legal documents, the legal acts and legal guidance. Thank you.
So this was the first part of the presentation on the amendments. For the ones who joined us recently, I repeat that we will have 3 questions and answer sessions. You can ask your questions via Slido at any moment. We see that there is already quite a number of questions that came in. The code for the Slido is in the event page. I would also ask you not to repeat questions, but to see first what questions are already there and upvote the ones that interest you most, so that we can then go through all the questions in the order of number of likes. And before coming to the first questions and answers session, we have a second presentation related to the amendments, and I introduce my colleague Agnese Boscarol, who will tell you now everything about the processes and the related IT tools. Agnese, please.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning, everyone. As Peter anticipated, in this second part of today's presentations on amendment, I will address the practical aspects of the process. In other words, we will walk through the different process steps with some examples and some clarifications on a few very specific situations you might be confronted with. I start with a summary of the main characteristics of the process from a business point of view. We already said that the process is completely managed online via the Funding and Tender portal, and that both parties can request to amend the agreement. When the request for amendment is submitted by the consortium, the process, the system foresees a mandatory step consisting in the revision of your draft request by the EU. And the preparation of an amendment request, it is a collaborative process, meaning that all participants can contribute, but it's only the coordinator who signs and submits the requests. In terms of timing, when the receiving party receives the request for an amendment, they have 45 days to countersign it. And when an amendment can be submitted, immediately after the countersignature of the grant agreement and before the end date of the action. As Isabel mentioned, there are indeed some cases where it is possible to amend the agreement after the end date of the action, but those situations are very limited, for example, to the change of bank account of the coordinator. Concretely, an amendment consists of a structured set of information and documents, meaning changes that you enter directly in the Funding and Tender portal, and those changes contribute to the generation of the request letter, which encompasses the list of changes requested, reasons, the justification why you need to amend your grant agreement, the list of supporting documents. Then the system generates the legal document, the amendment core, which lists all the provisions that are amended in the grant agreement. Then finally we have supporting documents. For example, the datasheet, the Annex 1 or the Annex 2. This depends on the changes you had introduced in the system. One new feature is the possibility to upload additional supporting documents. Those documents are not merged for signature, so in the section on documents, you will find that new feature. You will see there in red color, additional supporting documents. Those are any type of information you would like to submit to complement your request. For example, in the case of ERC grants, you have to submit a new supplementary agreement, or if an associated entity joins the consortium, proof of link of that associated entities, and any other documents that might complement your request. Here you have a visual representation of the sequence of the different steps. Just as, again, Isabel anticipated, there are 2 time limits. One, it is for the cancellation of your request. So the system allows you to cancel the draft version, basically, of your amendment before you sign it. You can also withdraw your request after the coordinator has signed it, but before it is countersigned by the EU. And this could be a useful functionality. We will see now in why. So I assume that you are very familiar with the funding and tender portal by now. So when the coordinator logs in the portal, they have to select the relevant project they would like to amend using the action menu, manage project, and from the landing page, they can load a new interaction with the EU. The pop-up window will appear, and in this case, in the bigger window, you will see that the system retrieves by default the latest legal data available. This meaning that when you will be preparing your amendment request, you will change, modify the latest information and legal data about your project. But in case you had to withdraw an amendment request, for example, because after you sign it, you spotted a mistake, a clerical error, you can withdraw, as said, the request and launch a new interaction with the EU. In this case, the system below latest legal data will show also the version of the amendment request that you had withdrawn. In this case, you can resume it, correct the mistake, and resubmit the version you have been working on. So when you start preparing your request, you will be redirected to this form. The upper part is already pre-filled by the system. And here you are prompted to enter the justification. So to describe the reasons why you need to amend the agreement. Make sure that the information you type here match with the changes that you enter in the different section of this form, and with Annex 1 Part B, when you also have to introduce changes in that part of the agreement annexes. Because discrepancies between the justification and the changes that you had introduced might be, for us, a good reason to send back the draft version of your request for revision. all possible modifications to the agreement are classified into the so-called amendment clauses, listed according a business reference and a description. Now, I'm not going through the entire list of possible changes, because on the funding and tender portal, you can download the amendment guide under reference documents, which contains the description of the purposes of each amendment clause, then also contains which might be the combination between the different clauses, and lists as well the supporting documents that have to be submitted. You might have already noticed that under Horizon Europe there's a new feature. Some clauses can be marked as error amendment. This functionality, so the possibility to activate the flag, is reserved to EU officer, but in practice, what does this mean? That, for example, you completed the grant agreement preparation, and after signing the grant agreement, you spotted an error in the bank account for payments. That is clearly a clerical error, so you have to inform your project officer and ask for an error amendment. As a general rule, you don't have to manually select the different amendment clauses. Most of them indeed are automatic, meaning that changes to the project information data trigger automatically the selection of the relevant clause. It is true, though, that there are a few additional clauses that must be selected manually. For example, the change of Annex 1, AT21, which is indeed a very common change. In the next slide, I propose a practical example already mentioned by Isabel. So here you can see how, in practice, you can terminate the participation of a beneficiary. So under tab Beneficiaries, where you have all the list of your partners, you hit that row in red color, and you make sure that you would like to terminate that partner. This amendment clause is, in most of the cases, combined with AT21, change of Annex 1, because of course you have to redistribute tasks and activities within the action, and with the change of the estimated budget in Annex 2. If you are managing ERC grants, the so-called portability is now handled in a different way, by a combination of different amendment clauses that are the addition of a new beneficiary, AT1, the change of coordinator, and in case the former hosting institution leaves the project, you also have to add AT for beneficiary termination. In this slide, I also included a reference to the removal of an associated partner, because for them, the possibility to fix an end of work date is available. And what does the end of work date mean? In other words, after you have confirmed that you would like to terminate the beneficiary and, if any, their affiliated entities, the system prompts you to enter one date, which is the exit date or the end of work date. This specific date marks the moment in which the participant actually stops implementing, working on the action. It can be retroactive, meaning that it can be fixed, set in a moment in time, which is before the submission of the amendment. So you have three options: a fixed date, the day after the submission of the amendment request, and the date of entry into force of the amendment. Then, as soon as you have chosen the option relevant to your case, the system automatically calculates the termination date. The termination date can be only in the future. So, for example, in this case, if our beneficiary has informed us that they stopped working on the 1st of May, and there a fixed date you enter 1st of May, then the termination date will be the date of entry into force of this amendment. Because since the termination date can be only in the future, the system will choose between the fixed date or the entry into force of the amendment, whichever is the latest. So, as I said before, the system, the changes that you have introduced in this case, automatically triggers the selection of the relevant clause, and under amendment information, you don't have to do anything else. Just don't forget to upload the opinion letter of the leaving beneficiary. This is mandatory, and if you don't do so, you will not be able technically to submit your amendment. Another common case is the change of Annex 1, so 8021. For example, you have to introduce changes in the work packages structure, reassign tasks to different beneficiaries, change deliverables dissemination level, for example, or reporting periods. Here again, after you have introduced the changes in the data, in the information on your action, don't forget to upload the revised, the updated version of Annex 1 in a single PDF document. In case your agreement foresees the option of the financial support to third parties, don't forget to merge in one single PDF document the section on the description on the support to third parties activities. Now, before we move on with the description of the next step following the preparatory phase, let me say a few words on some amendment clauses and their business rules. So not the legal provisions, but how this works practically in the system. As it was in the case under Horizon 2020, budget changes might be covered by the principle of budget flexibility. You find all the provisions under Article 5.5. The grant agreement does not set out limits or thresholds or percentage for budget transfers between beneficiaries. We are often asked these questions. So, since the grant agreement does not provide for this, so does not the system. You have to check with your project officer to which extent those changes impact the action and which will be the consequence on the action stacks. If you agree with them that an amendment is needed, you have to use again 8021, which I remind you, which is manually, and 8041, which is automatically selected by the system as soon as you change your estimated budget. Same goes for subcontracts. you you have forgotten to include subcontracting activities in your agreement. This change might be subject to the simplified approval procedure. If not, and as after discussion with your project officer, the same combination of clauses for your amendment apply, AT21 and AT41. A second question we've been asked is when you add a new beneficiary. You have just to make sure that the new beneficiary is registered in the participant register and has a PIC number before launching an amendment. Then the validation follows its own flow and is triggered by the action of adding this new beneficiary to the consortium. Talking about the addition of a new beneficiary, as it was the case for the retroactivity of the end of work date for a partner who leaves the consortium, so it is the case for the start date. The system allows you to set the start of their involvement in the implementation of the action retroactively. Interaction with other ongoing workflows. What happens when a technical and financial reporting session is open? Is the amendment request blocked? Yes, it could be. So you have to plan your changes in advance as much as possible, even though we are aware that you can foresee any events. But you, in this case, contact the project officer as soon as possible, because indeed there are some situations and some cases that might prevent you to technically, practically submit the amendment. If it is the case, your project officer will guide you and decide with you whether to proceed with the amendment or whether to conclude the reporting session before submitting an amendment. The change of coordinator without their agreement has been mentioned already. Here I just wanted to remind you that you have to use AT11, even though it's a change of coordinator without their agreement, but you can't do anything in the system unless you contact your project officer in advance. The partial transfer of rights and obligation is handled by the system by combining the addition of a new beneficiary and the termination of the previous legal entity. Now, going back to our walkthrough, you finished the preparation phase. The coordinator logs the draft version for review and sends it to the project officer. The project officer assesses your request. Everything is fine, no mistakes, so you can proceed. Otherwise, if there are some doubts or some clarifications are needed or discrepancies, as I said, the EU will send back the draft version for revision. After you agreed, which is the final version of the draft request, you will sign it, and the 40-day time limit for the counter-signature starts. When the amendment is signed, you will find in your process document one consolidated version, and as well all the the single files composing the amendment request. What if your request is rejected? you will receive a notification in writing within the same 45-day deadline. Cancellation, we mentioned it before. You consider that you have to deal with the changes differently, and you decide to cancel your amendment request. This version cannot be resumed or edited anymore. Contrary to an amendment request that you had withdrawn, which can be, as already said, resumed, edited, and resubmitted. One last word on an EU-initiated amendment. In this case, the coordinator will receive a notification with the request to sign the amendment and, of course, all the documents composing the amendment request. Again, if you have the same deadline to countersign the agreement or to express your disagreement if it is the case. To conclude, before requesting an amendment, check out the guidance material we have available on the Funding and Tender portal. As said, it is mainly for amendments, the amendment guide and the annotated grant agreement, where, for example, going back to partial transfers of rights and obligations at page 229, you have a long and detailed description of the different cases and situations. Try as much as possible to avoid belated requests, last-minute requests. Of course, we are aware, as said, that events might happen at any time, but try to avoid this as much as possible. When preparing your requests, try to reduce the complexity, try to use a concise and clear language, maybe better with listing all the changes, and always collaborate with the project officer in case you have any doubt, you need clarification, whether you are not sure if an amendment is necessary or not. And then the guidance documents available. Here you have the link to the two documents I mentioned, and on the description on the online manual, so what to do and how to do it directly in the portal. And with this, I conclude my presentations, and we are ready to take the questions you submitted in Slido. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Agnese. We are indeed a bit ahead of schedule, so we have plenty of time for replying to your questions. I would ask the colleagues now to bring up the Slido questions, and as I said, we will go through them in the number of order of likes, starting with the first one. What does budget flexibility, meaning no cap on the flexibility, mean in practice? And I assume that apart from Agnese, we also have the colleague from our legal unit who joins us in Teams. Is this the case? Yes. Is it Isabel? Okay, I don't see the screen here.
Selene.
Sorry?
Today it will be Angelique and Selene. Good morning to all of you.
Okay, hello Angelique and Selene. So we will try to answer your question. The first one, okay, Agnese, do you want to give it a try?
Oh, yes, because I mentioned it, it's more legally, so if Angelique would like to complement, please feel free to step in. But in slides you will find a reference to Article 5.5. There you have, this is a novelty under Horizon Europe, the list of cases where an amendment is indeed needed. So, for example, when you you do transfers between different budget categories, types, like contributions, for example, there an amendment is necessary. Otherwise, as said, transfers between beneficiaries or between other costs, like from from purchase costs to personnel cost, can be done. But what we advise you to do is to contact in advance your project officer whether you have any doubt, because the simplified approval procedure is applicable. Indeed, it exists. It is a concept already used under Horizon 2020. But we have to check to which extent those changes will impact the action. If colleague Hélène maybe would like to complement, or?
Yes, please. Do you want to?
Yes. Yes, I will complement. Thank you, Agnese. Indeed, the budget flexibility, this purpose is to say that when you submit your proposal, your budget is an estimation. So this means that during the course of your action, you may incur some different actual costs. And if it is the case that during this implementation of your action, the costs you incurred are actually lower than what you estimated when drafting your proposals, you can make transfers. So I would say two types of transfers, either from a budget category to another budget category, or either from beneficiaries to another beneficiary or affiliated entities. This is under the condition that there is no change to the description of your task and the description of your action. This is allowed provided that it is just about transferring a budget and not task. So if you are not transferring any task, but just give the extra budget you have in the end available to another entities or to another budget category, you will just have to explain and justify it in the reporting, in your report at a reporting stage. On the contrary, if these transfers mean also transferring tasks and making soft change in the description of your action, you will have to introduce an amendment. And as the question mentioned, flexibility cap, I will just precise that indeed under Horizon Europe there is no flexibility cap applicable.
Okay, thanks to both. Next question. If the budget remains the same, but the planned person months change, does that require an amendment? Who wants to start on that one?
I can start on this one.
Yes, please.
Good morning, everyone. So this question is also in line with the concept of budget flexibility. And here we are asking about person months, which means persons that are working in a work package per month. And perhaps you foreseen a work package with a number of person months, but at the end, during the implementation of the action, you realize you needed more persons in another work package. So normally this type of change should be, does not entail in an amendment. You mentioned that the budget remains the same, so that would be covered by budget flexibility. However, you should also consider if you are doing a substantial change of person months because you have realized that you need a shift of tasks and maybe this could affect the description of your action, then in that case, an amendment would be necessary. But the general rule, if it's just a change of a minor number of person months, that could be not necessary for an amendment.
If an affiliated entity requires an amendment, is an amendment of the consortium agreement also mandatory? Maybe again a question for our lawyer colleagues.
Yes, I could start by saying that yes, the addition of an affiliated entity requires an amendment to the grant agreement because it's a participant to the grant and is also mentioned in the Article 8. So this type of change would require an amendment. And then you are asking whether the consortium agreement should be also amended. So for a bit of a background, the consortium agreement, it's the internal agreement that the participants in the consortium conclude between themselves in order to ensure the smooth and the successful implementation of their actions. So from this perspective, it's a purely internal document between the consortium members, and it's not to be reviewed by the granting authority. So in that sense, it is purely up to the consortium to include which type of provisions they want to include, and notably on amendments and how to deal with the amendments internally. So that's what we could say. It would depend of the provisions of the consortium agreement, which are internal. But again, we strongly recommend that this type of provisions on how to deal with amendments, for instance, are included in these internal arrangements.
Okay, thank you. Next one. Which flexibility do we have for budget transfer between work packages or between beneficiaries? What percentage of the budget or effort can be transferred? I think we have replied to this to a large extent already in the presentations, but maybe, Agnese, you can say it again in other words so that it becomes entirely clear.
No, there's no percentage fixed, neither, as I said, in the grant agreement or by the system. So once again, this follows under the concept of budget flexibility explained by our colleagues. And there's no rule except check to which extent those budget transfers between beneficiaries or work packages impact the action. Does the change I want to introduce completely subvert what the European Commission funded? Do we subcontract most part of the activities we were supposed to do? Or it is just, as said, since the budget is an estimation, is just an adjustment during the implementation of the project, but the action stays the same. So,
okay, thank you. Next one. Can a project have two different amendments open at the same time? The issues require separate amendments. That's for Agnese, for sure.
Technically, yes, but you can open two amendments and work on that during the preparatory phase. So work on the draft version, but they cannot be submitted at the same time. So pay attention, because as I said, you have to work on the latest legal data. So as soon one of the two amendments, the one with highest urgency, is submitted, then the system for the preparation of the second amendment will consider as latest available legal data those that have been approved and submitted, signed with the first amendment you submitted. So this means in practice that you will have to start from scratch, doing again the work that you have been doing in parallel with the second amendment. So deal with amendments one by one, not at the same time, because in any case, you can submit just one and sign just one, and then only after that work on the second one. And the system will take the latest legal data that were changed with the first amendment that you signed.
Okay, clear. Is it possible to include an affiliated entity during the project? A company of the same group will assume some of the functions of the current affiliated entity. Maybe the lawyer colleagues start on that?
Yes. So as a general rule, you would say that yes, you can include new participants in your project during the course of your action. However, this new legal entity will have to comply with the conditions set in the call, as mentioned in the work program, especially because this entity will have to comply with the rule regarding this its location, and it will have also to comply with the grant agreement, depending also on these conditions. And if you include such an entity, please note that the maximum grant amount which has been set in your grant will not be increased. This is a maximum ceiling, and if a new participant joins, this means that the consortium will or should probably reshuffle the budget. But in this specific condition, what I understand is that this company would take over from a current affiliated entity, would take over some tasks. So I assume that this addition of the new beneficiary would also be accompanied with a reallocation of tasks, which means that an amendment of Annex 1 in addition to the inclusion of these new affiliated entities in Article 8 of your grant agreement.
On how to?
No, it's
Yes, I would like to add maybe.
Yes.
If it's a new affiliated entity, because it's not clear from the question whether it's an acquisition or something. If it's a new affiliated entity, just to remind that the new entity has to be registered and validated in the participant register. And it would also have to provide all the necessary supporting documents. As you know, affiliated entities must have a legal or a capital link with the beneficiary. So they would have to provide legal documents proving this link in particular. Yeah.
Okay. Agnes, anything to add?
No.
Okay. We go to the next one. Prior to requesting an amendment, is the project officer allocated to the project able to advise if an amendment is actually necessary or not? Agnes.
Yes. We always strongly recommend you to contact your project officer. They know in detail your project, and in any case, if themselves are not sure, they have plenty of resources to help them to advise you. So yes, always contact them because they are able to advise you.
And the next question is directly linked to it. Is there a time limit for the PO to provide feedback on the informal assessment? So if you consult before you actually introduce.
Oh, in the preparatory phase, then formally there's no time limit. As said, the time limit is the 45-day for the signature. So that officially starts after you had submitted your request. So formally, there's no limit for that assessment, that for the very first phase of the amendment requests.
Maybe I can add on this one. We have, of course, the rules, the general rules on good administrative conduct in the Commission and also the executive agencies, which give us a deadline for reacting to any request that we receive from the external world. I don't know by heart now the exact time limit, but there is a limit, which is possibly also very close to these 45 days. But we might come back and give you the exact number of days. Next one. Would postponement of the delivery of a deliverable or milestone require an amendment? The legal colleagues?
I would say in principle, this type of change, a small delay of a deliverable would not require an amendment. It would just go into a reporting with delay. However, I would like to emphasize that maybe if you are already considering substantial delays in your action, you may have to consider if the duration of the project and the data that you have set in your grant agreement is still appropriate. But in principle, I think the delay on some the deliverable milestones would not require amendment, but maybe Agnes could complement from the technical perspective.
Yes, indeed, because you might have already noticed that in the continuous reporting module, the project officer can enter a new due date. Of course, it's a short delay, usually in most of the cases, for the postponement of the of a deliverable. So there is this option. Formally, it's registered in the system, and in principle, as Selene said, this does not require an amendment unless it's a huge delay in the delivery and it impacts the action.
Okay, next question. Can the Commission provide a standard template for the amendment justification letter? In H2020, we received often different guidelines from the POs. Agnese.
Standard template. Well, it's a bit difficult to cover all the cases. As I said, the justification, the letter itself, it's generated by the system. So what you have to enter practically is the system, is the description of the changes you are introducing, what you would like to modify in the grant agreement. So you might, personal advice, do all the changes and then on the basis of those changes, summarize them in the first part in the form that I shown before under amendment information. Like you can list all the changes. Just make sure the most important part is that you there you mention all the changes that you have done in part B or in the other sections of the action. So there's no one single standard template. The letter, again, is retrieved and generated automatically by the system. Just pay attention to use a clear language in the justification when you describe why you want to amend, which are the situation, which events happen that forced you to change the agreement, and as a consequence, which are the changes.
Okay, next one. Is it necessary to include some additional documents to justify the transfer in budget between personnel costs and subcontracting? No changes in the total grant. Who wants to start?
I will give it a try. So subcontracting activities must be set out in the Annex 1 describing your action. Therefore, if you want to use budget flexibility, and in this particular case, I understand that the idea would be to transfer some availabilities under the personnel cost to the subcontracting, I assume that in that situation, subcontracting tasks are already part of this Annex 1. If subcontracting tasks are already planned and foreseen, we could imagine that budget flexibility could enter into play in here. On the contrary, if you have no subcontracted task for the time being, an amendment will be required to introduce this new task in your Annex 1. We have said earlier, you have understood earlier from the presentation that regarding subcontracting, you have two possibilities. In line with the grant agreement, the first option for you is when you want to make changes regarding subcontracts, you can either introduce an amendment, or the second possibility is to follow the simplified approval procedure. This procedure consists in not requiring an amendment, but to justify the changes you have made during the action in the report at reporting period. But what is important for you to note here is that if you want to apply and follow this simplified approval procedure, you must know that the granting authority may reject the cost you will declare if they are not in line with the grant agreement condition. Therefore, to summarize, regarding subcontracting, as a best practice, what we would recommend is that if you have the time at the moment of you want to make no change, is recommend that you make an amendment, even if it's just a budget transfer here, assuming that in this present case, it is about a subcontracting task which is already planned in the Annex 1. Otherwise, you will not be able to transfer any budget from personnel cost to subcontract if currently there is no subcontract task in your Annex 1.
Maybe I complement this reply in that case here. We should keep in mind that such a budget transfer is normally not just a simple budget transfer, because if you decide not to do work at the beneficiary, by the beneficiary through personnel costs, but you subcontract the task, then you shift the implementation of the action from the beneficiaries that were identified in your proposal to another entity. And as you know, the who does the work is also a part of the evaluation of your original proposal. And if there is major changes on this, this would require certainly an amendment, and it could even be rejected if it concerns the transfer of major tasks of the project from a beneficiary to a third entity. Okay, next question. Budget flexibility, amendment needed if you use less. Is there an amendment needed, I guess is meant. If you use fewer person months than foreseen in the grant agreement, however, the actual costs, the budget stay the same, more expensive stuff compared to the estimated grant agreement. Agnieszka?
Yes, I think
please.
I could start because we had a similar question. So normally, a minor change on the number of person months per work package would not require an amendment. However, you are saying that the budget that you had planned for staff, so for personnel cost, would be more expensive. And as said already, in Horizon Europe, we have budget flexibility, so it's based on the concept that your budget estimation, and in principle, you could do transfers between budget categories. For instance, if you planned some budget for, I don't know, travel costs, and at the end you are going to conduct some meetings online and you have budget left there, and you realize you need more budget for personnel costs, this type of transfer could be covered by the budget flexibility. However, I would like to insist again that this cannot result in a substantial change of the description of your action. So if you're realizing that you are needing more personnel costs because you are conducting a substantial change to your action task, then that could require an amendment of Annex 1. So it's indeed case by case, and these are the general rules, but you should always consider your particular case. Yeah.
Okay, next question. If an affiliated entity withdraws from the project and a new one joins, could this be done through one single amendment or are two separate amendments needed?
Definitely, I will go for one. So combining the amendment clause for the termination of the associated entity and the addition of a new one. This will, of course, not just save time, but present the whole situation. Because when you, if you submit just one amendment with the withdrawal of the first affiliated entity, then you will have to present an Annex 1 Part B with the redistribution of tasks, and then another one with the redistribution of tasks with the new affiliated entity. So for sure, go for one.
Okay, very clear. Next one, budget transfer between beneficiaries doesn't usually require an amendment, but is there some euro amount or percentage materiality limit above which amendment is still needed? I think the colleagues tried to reply this question. I give it another try myself. So there is no limit, no fixed limit. So if everything else stays the same, only the budget distribution changes, no amendment needed. But in practice, in reality, if you do major changes to the budget, this has an impact on other elements of your grant for sure. So either you redistribute tasks from one beneficiary to another, or you even have to change the way in which the project is implemented. And for these cases, you need, of course, amendments. So the fact that you shift budget is then not the cause for the amendment, but the other elements that are changed alongside this budget transfer. Okay, next one. Is the procedure for amendments exactly the same in actual cost-based grants as in lump sum grants?
Yes, apart from the changes in the budget, of course, but the rest, the procedure, the technical procedure is exactly the same. So same process clauses that you'll find, as I said, in an amendment guide stays the same. Addition of a beneficiary or change in Annex 1 and so on and so forth.
Okay, I will think that will be now the last question we reply, because we then have to go to the next presentation. So it's a question on interaction between amendment and reporting. Will an amendment session open right before the financial reporting, postpone the financial reporting itself?
That's for me, I think, technically the interaction. So as I said, there are some cases in which an amendment is blocked by the reporting and vice versa. So for example, your amendment will change the schedule of the reporting and impact the one you are working on. You can't do in any other way. So of course you need to first process the amendment. This, of course, will postpone the financial reporting. Or, for example, a simple case, the change of the bank account details. Process your amendment, that will be done very quickly, so the financial reporting will be postponed by a few days. But in general, here again, check carefully whether that amendment is really necessary when a reporting session is open. If it is, and you have your good reasons, this happens. Check with the project officer how you can solve the situation which is really needed in that specific amendment and which changes can be postponed after the reporting session is closed, so as not to have a major impact on the timing of your financial reporting.
Okay, thank you. With this, we close this questions and answers session. I would encourage you to continue asking questions via Slido on the next presentations in particular. And we are now coming to the second part of our today's session, which is about the reporting and the payments. And it will start with, again, a presentation that is a video recording, and then we will have also a live presentation, and after this we will have the second questions and answer sessions. So colleagues, please start the video recording.
Hello, I work with Isabelle in the same legal unit in the Directorate General for Research and Innovation of the European Commission. I'm a legal officer there, so today I will present you reporting and payment aspect from this legal perspective. And then afterwards, my colleague Petros will actually present you the things from a more IT perspective, I would say. So I will try to not anticipate too much on what I'm going to say about reporting and payment, because I think a lot of things about concretely how things will have to be handled in the IT system, visually speaking, where you will have to click, who will have to click in this IT system, what will have to be filled in there. This will be properly explained in a visual manner by my colleague Petros just afterwards. So I will give you the general scope, the general legal framework attached to reporting and payment, stemming from your grant agreement you signed with us as granting authority. And I will try to give you generalities and maybe also speak about a couple of specifics during my presentation. So let me just share my presentation and then we start. And just let me start with the beginning, it will be definitely better. So let's start with the reporting aspect stemming from the model grant agreement. So here, actually with this first slide, I would like to illustrate the two types of reporting you will have to handle when you will implement your action. So what we call a continuous reporting and what we call a periodic reporting. So as you can see with this quite illustrative slide, continuous reporting will happen over also the action duration, and it will be more or less regular updates about a certain element of the project. And then you will have at certain point in time periodic report per se, where you will have also to explain the work carried out and also to report about the cost aspect. So with this presentation, maybe I should have mentioned at the beginning, I will speak mainly about the actual cost-based model grant agreement. So I will not speak about the specifics of the lump sum model grant agreement where the way you report is actually different. So here we will focus on actual cost in an actual cost environment, so to say. So if we start with explaining a little bit more elements attached to the different reporting. So, and if we start with the first one, continuous reporting, basically what you have to know, it's all about providing regular updates on certain elements about your project. And by certain elements, I want to illustrate that, but for instance, your deliverables, the milestone of the project, the critical risk you have foreseen, or if there is new critical risk coming, and certain also indicators or information which are really specific to an EU program. So when I say that, for instance, for us, for Horizon Europe, for your Horizon Europe grant, you will have also to tell us, to report in this continuous reporting about element on touching upon IPR aspect, communication and dissemination activities as well, or also element attached to open science, like your open publication, your data sets, etc. So you will have different elements on which you will have to continuously report according actually to timing and condition already set out in your project proposal and becoming then your action description, so your Annex 1 of your grant agreement. So this is what you will have to do with this continuous reporting, and at some point in time, regularly, you will have also to provide a periodic report, and both continuous reporting and periodic reporting are obviously interlinked in the sense that what you will have already reported continuously via a dedicated module in the IT system about deliverables, about milestones, in a structured way, with structured table. You will see that in the presentation after by my colleague Petros. This information already provided in this continuous reporting will feed also into the periodic reporting, and especially in the technical part, and especially what we call the part A of this technical part. You will have a part A and a part B. Part A is stemming from what you will have filled in the continuous reporting module, and part B is a narrative part, actually. So you will have to upload a PDF document about the action implementation, the progress made in the action implementation. And within this reporting, periodic reporting, you will have also to tell us about financial aspect of the project. So there will be a financial part here. And this financial part will look different in terms of document, in terms of information to be provided to us as granting authority, depending if we are speaking about an additional pre-financing, so request for additional pre-financing after the first one being made at the beginning of the project, or if we are speaking about an interim payment, so at interim stage for an interim periodic report, or a final payment, so at final stage. So if, for instance, you have it is foreseen in your grant agreement to have another, for instance, a second pre-financing, what you will have to provide us with is a statement on the use, on the consumption, if you prefer, of the previous pre-financing. If you are reaching actually an interim payment per se, an interim periodic reporting period, you will have to provide us with what we call individual financial statements. So there will be individual per beneficiary, an affiliated entity, and this will be also consolidated in the IT system. And you will have also to explain a bit more about the use of resources and maybe provide some cost explanation. And you may have also to provide us with a certificate on the financial statement, what we call a CFS there. And for Horizon Europe, this CFS will have to be provided only at final payment if a certain threshold of EU contribution requested is reached, actually. So this is a summary, an overview of both the continuous reporting aspect and the periodic reporting aspect. And you have two specific articles in your model grant agreement explaining that, framing, giving you the legal frame attached to this reporting. So these are Article 21 and 22 in your model grant agreement. Now, if I give you some extra features, extra insights about the reporting aspect, it's good to know that you have in your grant agreement what we call a data sheet. So it's really the very first pages you can see in your grant agreement. For instance, if you open your PDF version, where you will see a summary basically of your key aspects of your key information touching upon your grant agreement. And one of the piece of information you can see in this datasheet is a schedule and the modalities notably attached for reporting and payment. So there is a dedicated section. So it's notably under section 4. 4.1 is about the continuous reporting, and 4.2 is about the periodic reporting. Also, what you have to know is for your financial statement. So here for your periodic report, when you have to provide us with financial information, so provide us with financial statement at interim payment and final payment stage. This financial statement must be drafted in euros. So this is stemming from Article 21.3 of your grant agreement. And in terms of reporting language, the principle, which is also enshrined and reflected in Article 21.4 of your grant agreement, is that in principle, the reporting language is the language of the agreement, and generally it will be in English. So these are, let's say, extra features to have in mind about reporting aspect. Now, moving to the payment, and also you will see the link with the reporting, and especially periodic reporting with financial dimension, where you have to report information about cost. I would like to give you some generalities, and then I will show you in a slide after how it looks like, how it is captured and summarized in the datasheet I was mentioning. So for the payment, you will have also in the datasheet under point 4.2 a table basically summarizing the schedule and the modalities to request payment, and when this payment, the different kind of payment will be done. If we are speaking about the pre-financing, if we are speaking about an additional pre-financing, or an interim payment, or a final payment. So this information will also be embedded in your datasheet. So just as a general best practice, I mean, you may have, of course, administrative staff, administrative support to help you handling your grant agreement and also this reporting and payment aspect, or the amendment aspect just discussed before. But I mean, as best practice, it's good to know that you have this datasheet that can help you. Either you are a purely scientific staff or an administrative staff, but having a general overview of your actions, the key data, information about the calendar, about the reporting aspect, about certain cost eligibility aspects. So everything is also in this data sheet. So it's really, I mean, it's worth at least to have a look at this very first part, even if you, of course, be knowledgeable about the whole part of your grant agreement. Now, for the payment, what you will have also to know, and probably this is something you already know as coordinator, is payment will be handled through you, coordinator, through the coordinator. You are our entry point, so to say, our main contact point. And payment that will be released by us as granting authority after periodic report stage, you will be paid to the coordinator. So this is also reflected in Article 22.1 of your grant agreement. So this payment will be made in euro and to the bank account of the coordinator, and the bank account of the coordinator is also mentioned in the datasheet, as my colleague Isabelle was mentioning before in her presentation. So what you will have to do as coordinator, once you have received this payment from us as granting authority, is to distribute further this payment to the rest of your consortium, to the rest of beneficiaries, and you will have to do that without unjustified delay in order for the rest of the consortium to get paid. So this is what we call the distribution of the payment. Now, of course, you may have, let's say, already agreed internally about certain further aspects touching upon the payment, how you will handle internal payment, this distribution towards the beneficiary, and this may be in your consortium agreement. It's possible that this is a point covered by your consortium agreement, how you handle the distribution, the specific schedule attached to it. This is to be settled at the level of the consortium. But at the level of the model grant agreement, in any case, things are stayed and provided that way. As coordinator must distribute further the payment he received. But then for the amount, for the exact schedule, etc., this is settled at consortium level, generally in your consortium agreement. So now I would like to show you what you will see. You may have already seen in your grant agreement in this famous datasheet at the beginning of it. This is this table I was mentioning before, summarizing the key information, the key aspect about reporting and payment. So basically the schedule attached to the different reporting period, and the payment, the date, the delay for the deadline for us as granting authority to pay you according to what you have declared to us in your periodic report. The EU contribution you are entitled to. So you will have an initial pre-financing. You may have, depending on your grant agreement, depending on the specific type of action, an additional pre-financing, which is also possible. And then you may have an interim payment, or maybe 1 or 2 interim payments. It really depends on the action duration of your project. And then at the end of the project, there will be a final periodic report, and we will release if the balance is, let's say, positive. I will come to that just after, about notion of payment, balance, and calculation in the slide after. But if the balance is positive on the side of the consortium, we will release the final payment at the end of the action. So after having received and assessed your periodic report and the information therein. Moving now to the payment per se, how we will handle the things as a granting authority. What you have to know is, of course, there are articles dealing with that and specifying quite explicitly in a quite telling way how things are calculated. Payments are calculated at different stages. So for the pre-financing, what we can say is basically that the idea is to provide you as a consortium with a float, so a first payment in order for you to run and start smoothly your action implementation. And legally speaking, it remains the property of the EU until the final payment. So it's an advance payment we give you in order for you to start your action with some float. Then you may have an extra pre-financing payment. It's possible. It depends on your action. And what we will ask you, I was mentioning that already, is a declaration on the use of the first pre-financing we have distributed to you, and especially to tell us if you have already used 70% of this first pre-financing received, or the previous pre-financing received. And then we will adjust the release of the second or the next additional pre-financing to you according to this declaration on the consumption of the previous pre-financing you have received. So just to see if you need more money, or if you have still enough money left from what you are declaring to us in terms of consumption of previous payment. For interim payment, so here, strictly speaking, when we speak about interim payment, you will have to report to provide us with financial statement per se, so individual financial statement. You have a model of the financial statement in your model grant agreement. In your grant agreement, it's the Annex 4. It's basically reflecting more or less your Annex 2, which is a budget table. So in terms of cost category, what kind of cost you can declare, which cost category, if it's actual cost, if it's unit cost, the kind of cost you have to declare. So you will have to use this model of financial statement and explain to us what were the cost, what have been the cost incurred so far at interim period stage. So what we will do as granting authority, we will calculate the total accepted EU contribution, so based on your cost statement, and we will apply a limit, a ceiling to this interim payment. So in Horizon Europe, this ceiling is also reflected in the datasheet. It will be 90% of the maximum grant amount, so the maximum grant amount set out for the whole action in your grant agreement. So we will keep 10%. Actually, we will keep a little bit more because we have also a 5% generally of retention. Let's say a levy of 5% for what we call the mutual insurance mechanism. There will be a presentation about that just after. So in the end, it will be concretely for you 85% potentially you can receive before the final payment. So we have this ceiling rule applying, and then we release the money at interim payment. At final stage, we will calculate, actually there will be 3 steps of calculation. We will calculate the total accepted EU contributions, also based on your financial statement, on the cost you have declared throughout the action duration. We will cap it to the limit of the maximum grant amount, so what was the maximum grant amount foreseen and reflected as such in your grant agreement, in the datasheet as well. And we will apply also, if it is the case, if it is needed, a reduction due to what we call the no profit rule. So the no profit rule will come into play at final payment stage, and we will so calculate the final amount due, and we will calculate actually a balance. We will, and by a balance, with this amount calculated, so the amount you are entitled to, the final payment, we will see this amount and we will compare it with what you have already received from us via first pre-financing, via first payment at interim stage, etc. So if you have not received enough, meaning the balance is positive on your side, on the consortium side, we will release the payment. On the contrary, if you have received too much in the sense as compared to the amount you have received and the cost you have declared and we accept at final stage, there will be a recovery. Also, what you can encounter, it might happen in the course of your action implementation. This is a specific case mentioned at the bottom of this slide. It's we may have to calculate an amount due at beneficiaries termination, so at beneficiaries participation termination. If it happened that during the action implementation, the beneficiaries participation has to be terminated. So you will ask an amendment for that, and then what we will ask you is basically to provide us with what you have paid to this beneficiary. Also, beneficiaries will have to provide us with its financial statement, so the cost he has incurred so far before is due to leave the action implementation, and we will calculate also a balance. So we will compare what he has received from you, from the coordinator, in terms of money distributed concretely, actually, to this beneficiary, and to what it is entitled to, according to the cost he declares in his financial statement. And if the balance is positive, meaning positive for the consortium, there is something to pay from our side as granting authority, we will include this amount in the payment of the next interim or final payment for the consortium. So it will be embedded and added at the next payment. On the contrary, if the balance is negative, so meaning beneficiaries has received too much as compared to what he is entitled to, it's declared, it's reported in his financial statement, the amount will have to be recovered. You will have to pay back the money. So this will be the different cases where we will have to pay and where you will have to report to us your elements, so either about the beneficiary's termination or about the action implementation via the periodic reporting. So, and then accordingly we will assess and we will, where need be, release payment. So this concludes my presentation about the general aspect touching upon reporting and payment modalities. Before leaving the floor to my colleagues Petros about, let's say, the more concrete aspect in the IT system, how you have to handle the thing, just a couple of things I want to mention, and maybe you will have already think about that for your question in Slido. I didn't touch upon certain specific reporting aspects, notably in the context of ERC action or EIC action, but you may have questions about that. So just for you to know that indeed there are some specific reporting requirement aspect for those type of action, notably for what regard continuous reporting. But this is something I have not covered here because I was really focusing on the general aspects for the general actual cost-based model grant agreement. So I thank you very much for your attention, and now I have the pleasure to leave the floor to my colleague Petros. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Manuel Romaris, and before going to Petros, actually, I will introduce myself a little bit. I'm training coordinator for Horizon Europe, and for the rest of the morning, I will take the role of Peter. So, as Peter mentioned, we had a recorded presentation on the legal aspects of reporting, and now we have a live presentation from Petros Belsis. Is Head of Sector at the Common Implementation Center here at the Directorate General for Research and Innovation of the European Commission. Petro will talk us about the business process and the IT tool of reporting and payments. Petros.
Hello. Thank you, Manuel. Welcome to our presentation. So we will indeed go to the technical aspects of reporting in Horizon Europe. a small outline of what we will present today. So we will discuss very briefly the framework because it was already presented by Julian. And then we will dive into the details, the technical aspects of the reporting. So we will present the two reporting modules. The continuous reporting module, which is the one that is first, let's say, activated, the main screens, and then we will show also specific points concerning what has changed in some of the tables and some of the obligations which concern also reporting. We will go then to the periodic reporting and also the different, let's say, aspects of what has to be done there, because they are mostly also important for the payments. And then we will also cover the financial reporting, which is also part of the periodic reports. So in brief, I will go to that very fast because it was already covered extensively. So you know that the reporting is it's necessary to monitor the activities of the project in order to verify that what you have promised in the description of the action is according to what you deliver during the lifetime of the project and what has been mentioned in the Annex 1 of the grant agreement, and also to verify the eligibility of the costs that you claim. So the commission or the agency that supervises the action, they need to be able to verify that the project is implemented correctly. And for that, the beneficiaries must submit the information requested and the deliverables that are referenced to the grant agreement. Project officers can assess what you submit, but they can also be, in case of specific expertise required, they can be assisted by experts. So concerning the timing, the reporting is a continuous task. So as your project advances, you deliver results, you deliver deliverables, and then you have always to inform and to submit through the system these important, let's say, deliverables or the artifacts that are related to your project. And in addition, some special information that helps us to evaluate the policy aspects of the program. But there are specific periods where reporting becomes relevant, and these are related to the predefined reporting periods, and they are also linked to the payments. For that, to assess after the specific periods, the specific reports that you are required to submit, there are review meetings organized by the project officer in which usually experts participate also in order to evaluate and help the project officer to take a decision. So the two reporting modules that we already briefly mentioned, one is the continuous reporting module, and this one is activated immediately after the grant agreement enters into force. So after you have completed the grant agreement preparation, the continuous reporting module opens. This is a number of, it contains of a number of tables, a number of tabs with information structured will be entered there. And then as you can see, in predefined periods, depending also on the type of action, depending on the duration of the project, after the end of each of these reporting periods, the specific for the periodic reporting, then there is another module opening. We will show that there is a high interconnection between the two, so the information is also present in both, but in the periodic you need to submit additional information concerning the technical aspects of your project and the financial costs that you will claim. There is also a final report at the end of the project, which is similar to the periodic. Now, the continuous reporting module consists of several sections. So the first one is the project summary, where we will show in a while the detailed information that it contains, and there you have to describe also for the external people to publish information that can make your project more, let's say, visible to the externals and to the internals, of course. Then there is a section where you upload the deliverables that have been described during the preparation of the grant agreement. You will report concerning the achievement of the milestones that have also been described in the grant agreement preparation, and also it was present in the proposal. The critical risks that are important to follow up and see if they have materialized, if you have taken the necessary counter measures to not materialize the risks. And then there will be a series of reporting on horizontal issues, policy mainly aspects. For example, the tables which are related to the open access obligations, then tables which concern the reporting for the obligations concerning dissemination, exploitation, or communication, and a number of policy questions which are also new to Horizon Europe, and we will explain in more detail. This reporting, as we said, this, let's say, section in the IT tool also is activated at the moment you enter in the grant agreement. So on the contrary, the periodic reporting consists also of this basic information that is present in the continuous reporting. So you also have the project summary there, deliverables, and some policy questions. But in addition, you have a part B where you have to describe the technical aspects of your project, how you have advanced in the work and the delivery that is referenced in the Annex 1 of your project. And then if you have deviations from what you have described in the description of, you have described in the description of the action in the part, the technical part. In addition, you will have also a financial part for the periodic reports, which consists the financial statements, individual for each beneficiary and consolidated for all the project, for all the beneficiaries. You will have a section where you will provide explanation of the use of resources and concerning also subcontracting or in-kind contribution by third parties. Here, as we mostly focus on actual cost grants, we just have to make a remark that, as you know, there are actions which start to implement what we call lump sums. So it's another simplified cost of reporting. It focuses on different aspects. We have dedicated presentations for lump sums, but also here just to mention that here this part is not applicable for lump sum grants. Also, in case you exceed a specific threshold, you will be required to provide certificates of financial statements. And again, this is not applicable for lump sum grants. This just a remark to clarify. Now, based on all this information, there will be a report, will be compiled, and then it will be submitted officially for evaluation by the project officer with the help of the experts potentially. Now, before submitting any information, you can always consult the template, which describes what is required to be submitted in the reporting. And here you can see that the template contains a description of the part A, which is the structured information in the tables, the part B, the questions that you will need to answer in text form, and also the use of resources. And you can always find it on the portal by selecting, of course, we're talking now for Horizon Europe, so you will select the programming period 2021 to 2027. The program is Horizon Europe, and in the templates you can always find the relevant periodic report templates. Of course, you will see some of the questions that they have an indication that they are not applicable for all actions. So the template that you will be able to download from your project site is the one that applies to your action. The other one that you will find on the portal maybe contains some questions because it's the generic template, so maybe some of the questions will be not applicable for your action. But you can always take the one that applies from the area in the project. So here, for the continuous reporting part, now you can access in the portal, you know how to log in with your ECAS account. And then when you enter in your specific area, you have my organization, my proposal, and then you will click here on my projects. And then by selecting the actions and manage the project, you can enter into the specific area for your specific project. Here you see, usually, as we have described also in other presentations, you have the different, let's say, workflows that are open or closed. This one has been, of course, closed, the proposal and evaluation. And after you sign the grant agreement, you can see that you have the continuous reporting. By clicking to it, you can be you will be transferred to the grant management system, but this one is totally transparent, so you'll just see a different interface, but for you, you're still in the portal. So we can see here that we have the different tabs that we will describe. And here, just on the terminology, you will see that when everything is submitted, let's say correctly, you have this green tick, which means that it is okay for submission. You can always check for a section to validate to see that everything is okay. But normally here the options is that if you have the green tick, it's everything okay. You can have a yellow sign. That means a warning, it's not blocking. but something you need maybe to take action, you need to attract your attention. And it can be also sometimes that there is a blocking, an X, a red, which means that there is a problem and then you need to react because you cannot submit a report. Then there are some tabs which have this I information only, so you can also see, you can consult the ones that are also for informative purposes. So considering now the specific, by starting with the first tab, it is the summary for publication. And here, well, it was already present in Horizon 2020, but for those which are new to the programs, here you have different questions. So there is a section which has also a limit of characters. If I'm not wrong, it's 2,500 or 4,000. I'm not sure now. You will have to check. But what we need to say is that you need to provide a concise summary of what is your project about, and also to use a language that is not very technical. So it is also addressing to the external people, because this will be published in external websites that we use for dissemination. So it will be in the portal, it will be in Cordis, which is also another site for dissemination of results. And here the advice that we would like to give you is that please do not enter information that is not, of course, for the general public. It should be a plain language, and also do not use something that is sensitive. So if you have to do something that is, you think that should be protected, you can describe it with other words. You don't need to give exact details, something that would compromise, let's say, the criticality or the sensitivity around this information. Here you have also some other questions which are also obligatory. So you need to describe what is the work that you will perform and the achievements that you plan to do, what is beyond the state of the art, the overall added value that your project will provide. And then there is another question which is new in Horizon Europe. You have to give some feedback also to support your project officer to do their own reporting concerning what is the policy aspects that covers that you will cover with your project. So the next we will go to the deliverables. This is again a tab that was also present always in the previous frameworks program, not only in Horizon 2020. So here is the section where you will have to submit your deliverables. As we had described in the section before the grant agreement, you will all have all the deliverables that you described from the proposal. Sometimes you might be finding here sections, additional deliverables if your project is subject to ethics scrutiny and then the reviewers have identified some issues and then you need to report, or security. Here you will be able to upload the deliverables. Now, the statuses can be different. They are here at the right. It can be pending. It means it has not been delivered yet. And it can be in draft mode, which means that you have uploaded but not submitted. It could be submitted. Then, depending on the, after that, you can have two phases. It could be approved if the EU officer says it's okay, or it could be rejected in case you need to do corrections. So you can see here that you can submit the deliverable. Here it is a maybe more focused image of the exact interface that you will face. And then in case you have a deliverable that should be submitted during the periodic report, but it's not yet, and before the periodic report is logged for review, you will be asked to justify the delay, if any, why, it has not been submitted yet. Now, we have also a little change in the description, let's say, of the dissemination statuses. So, as you know, most of the deliverables normally are public, which means that they can be published. They don't have any content that should not be making them public. Then we have the sensitive, which means that there is something that prevents them from being published. And then there are some other statuses which are for very specific programs which have to do with higher classification statuses, and they are treated differently. They are not even submitted sometimes in the system. For you, what you need to keep here is that please be aware that the public deliverables will be published in external systems. Therefore, please try to avoid putting their information that is sensitive, or prepare your project officer if you see that by mistake you have characterized a deliverable as public. Before completing the submission, please contact your project officer to take action and change this information. Usually it will require an amendment. Also, please do not put their personal data, because again, these deliverables, once they are marked as public and you submit them, upon approval, they will be published in external websites. And then it's very complex to retrieve them, and please try to be in advance warned and act accordingly. So when you submit here a deliverable, you can add always a comment. And then another remark is that all the beneficiaries can upload the deliverable, but only the coordinator takes the responsibility to submit them to the EU. Now, when you submit the deliverable, the project officer will be warned. And then if they reject the deliverable, you will get a notification, or also the participant contacts will get a notification to notify them that they have to take action and resubmit maybe or correct the deliverable. Another tab is the one that concerns the milestones. So here you know that there are important, let's say, milestones that you have set up in the project. And here what you have to do is to verify if the actual date that you have the due delivery date, and then you have the actual delivery day, and whether the milestone has been achieved. So here you just have to enter and declare if they have been achieved, and then of course the date. So another section is the critical risks, which again you have described. Here you just have to make a reference to the reporting period. Then if the risk has materialized, if you have some other remarks, if you can update something on it. And then you can also add something that is, if you have encountered an unforeseen risk, like was the case, for example, we had with the COVID situation, and then it is, let's say, having some impact and risk in your correct implementation of the action. So you can always add a new risk, and then you can also write how you plan to mitigate it. Now, another tab which existed also but has been redesigned for Horizon Europe is the one that concerns the dissemination activities. Here the main change is that, from shifting to reporting numbers, let's say, and for specific type of activities, here we have shifted to a more qualitative approach. So you need to describe the type of dissemination activities that you have performed for your project. Especially, of course, you need to do for all of the ones that you have charged the costs for them. And also to add some information concerning the target group, concerning, let's say, the status of the activity, why you selected this activity, and of course, what is the name of the activity that you have to describe. So it's purely a descriptive, qualitative approach. Here you need to mention all the activities and also provide some additional information. Nothing, I think, difficult. The same is for the communication activities, which is a new section for Horizon Europe. Here you need to refer to communication activities, of course, the ones that were supported if you charge costs, and also others. For example, you can have a social media campaign or anything. You can also mention here information basically like the target group, what was the aim, why, and what was the outcome, and what is the status, if they have been completed, if they are ongoing, or something else. A new tab also that is related here, I will stay a little more because this is totally new, and as you know, we have described it also in the grant agreement. So we have an obligation by the legal framework to report on the impact of the framework, or also at a lower level if we see the project, how it has, let's say, improved, we hope, or how it has impacted the career of the researchers. So what you need to do here, you already know that in the proposal you needed to mention some researchers, the ones that you knew at that moment. Then at grant agreement you have another table, you need to add the new names. So you need to put here all the researchers in the project. What is the definition of a researcher? If you want, you can look in the Frascati manual, so it declares there all the activities. In simple terms though, we don't want you to list all the personnel. You just have to list people who are doing activities purely research. Now, in questions that we receive, sometimes from industry or other support actions, let's say, there could be projects that do not have, or not all their personnel, of course, maybe can be researchers. In that case, I mean, for example, for the industry, there are people who are researchers, but maybe they think that they're doing more applied things and they do not consider. This is a border case you can choose, but in general, we think that most of the cases that you have, you will identify easily. So you need to report the names. They are here for policy monitoring reasons. Maybe they will receive a questionnaire later how the project, let's say, affected their careers. And what we have to do here is you enter the beneficiary, then you have to enter the name and the surname, gender, nationality, email, and then you have the career stage, which is a generic categorization. For example, could be a full professor, associate professor, PhD student, or something else. Then what is the role in the project? If it could be just secondary, for example, for a student, we wouldn't have a leading role, but for some professors, probably somebody will have a leading role or one more than one, maybe in the project. The contract duration, in generic terms again, because we don't want to collect information for other purposes than, as we said, for the policy. So there will be also some questions that exactly show this. For example, what was the category when you entered the project? Maybe the researcher was upgraded. For example, for a student, became from a PhD student became a doctoral. They received their PhD, or they became assistant professor. Assistant professor could be upgraded to associate or professor, and so on. So this is again for purely purposes statistical. And then you also need to know that you can enter people who are not, even if they participate, but their, let's say, salary is covered by other means. Maybe they are covered by another institution, they could be by the ministry, but still if they work in the project, you can always reference them, and you are requested to do so. Now, another important remark is that we shouldn't allow, it shouldn't be happening to remove researchers. So you shouldn't do that, because it means that you have promised the researcher to work and they didn't. So that could affect also the impact concerning when the evaluation was done, because if there was a renowned person, a scientist, maybe you also received additional, let's say, marks for the presence of that person. And it would be very exceptional to say that suddenly they will not participate. Of course, it can always happen due to a sickness, but normally you are not allowed to remove without giving explanations. So another important area is as you know, that during also Horizon 2020 and here in Horizon Europe, we have further strengthened the focus on providing open access to all results. So open access is a very important obligation that we want to further enhance. And here you know that all the results, that the publications that you need to, let's say, you create with the funding of the project, they need to be in open access. But in addition to that, in Horizon Europe, there are some changes further to the, let's say, the direction of open access. And all the peer-reviewed applications need to be deposited in a repository. So, which has specific attributes: findable, accessible, the FAIR principles, interoperable and usable. You can find the list of FAIR repositories easily by looking on the internet for these FAIR repositories. And what you need to do now, you need, the day you receive the acceptance, not only it could be open in the journal, let's say the portal of the journal, it could be there, the document there available, but your obligation is to take a copy and put it in a repository. And this is done because the journal sometimes sees, let's say, production, they can change name, or they can be hard maybe to find, but the repository will always be there. So you have this obligation, you take a copy and you put it in a repository, together with some kind of metadata. Now, there are no embargo periods anymore. So you know that for some, let's say, disciplines, there was this obligation. You could have a 6-month grace period to submit the article, let's say, even in green access. Now you need to do it the same day for all categories of science. Another important that you need to be careful, let's say, obligation is that if you use a hybrid journal, and hybrid means that there are journals which have some of the content open, some other not. So if you pay, they have it, but it's not linked to the payment. You need to ensure that all the journal, all the articles are open. So this is fully open access. Now, if you use a hybrid journal, the problem, what you have to be careful is that you cannot charge the cost. So if you pay and you open the article, but it is in a journal that not all the articles are open, you are still compliant with the open access, but you cannot claim costs. This is important in order to avoid misunderstandings and later have some surprises. So you can charge costs only if the article is fully open. Now, you also need to deposit datasets and other kind of results like software, so again in open access. And for that, we have a separate table that we will show in a while. Unless if there is a reasonable grade for exception, you need to show, for example, if it was medical data or some other sensitivity or other issues that prevent you from doing so, and then the obligation could be waived on exception. Now, the most, let's say, focus is on the publications concerning the open access artifacts. And here the table has been a little restructured. It has been different from what it was in Horizon 2020, although the basic things are there. So as you can see, the focus is mostly now again on the repository. So I have put with two red. And what is the difference? So we have these PIDs. This is the electronical, the DOI, let's say the electronic reference of the article. So we have the repository link. So you need to give the repository link here. And you also have the published version of record, this is the one that we mentioned earlier. So the journal will also probably have a DOI, so you can enter it here, but we are requiring also to have the link for the repository. If you enter, you will see it by the system, you will be facilitated because we have a mechanism to retrieve publications for you. If you have entered correctly the metadata when you submitted the journal or the acknowledgement, we try to harvest automatically with text mining tools, and then it will be offered to you. I will show in a while in another screen. So you can select if the publication is already in the system for you ready. The metadata, the rest will be probably, as the page, the journal issue or the year of publication, that will be collected automatically. You will only have two questions in order to show that you complied with also the other obligations that we mentioned earlier. So you have to confirm if it was submitted in a repository at the day you received the acknowledgement. And also there is another question, if you charge publishing fees to the project, in which case if you select yes, and the amount probably will be pre-filled, or you can fill it if you want, or if you don't have you can leave it empty. But normally for most of the cases, it will be already collected by the metadata that we collect. But if you say yes, of course, you will see a warning sign also to tell you that if it was hybrid, it is not, let's say, eligible cost. The table is big, but do not worry. In most of the cases, it will be automatically, let's say, for you. Of course, with your confirmation, we do not put the data. So here is what I just referred before. So we have the system. This OpenAIRE is a project that is continuously expanding. It is covering a lot of journals, repositories. So depending on the acknowledgement and the reference, the metadata when you submitted your journal, we will be able to link, to propose at least publications that we see relevant for your project. And this is the upper table, so you have the recommendations. You can select, these are from a real project, so they are real project metadata. And what you can do here is you can select and confirm this publication is of course mine, and then goes here in the publications of the project. So as you can see here, here are the metadata of a specific publication. You can see that there will be most of them automatically harvested. Now, in the case that you don't find the publication that you wanted to report, you can add the publication, and here again we can help you by providing the DOI, the electronic reference of the repository of or the article that you want to do in the journal. We connect to external sources like the Crossref database, which contains a lot of metadata for publications, and we try to retrieve the other for you so that you don't have to type everything. Now, in limited cases, in a small percentage, let's say, of the cases, either because the journal does not provide such services or something else has happened, that you still have the possibility to add manually publication with all the reference. Now, a new table in Horizon Europe is the one that you encode the project results. So here, this is again a new table. Of course, we will explain that publications are also results, but you don't enter here publications. Here you have specific description of the main, let's say, outcomes of the project. And here, for example, you can encode a scientific discovery, a theory, for example, a product, a service that you developed, a process, method, or policy recommendation, or exchange, sometimes exchange of stuff. So something that is characterizing, let's say, important outcome of your project. You need to describe it here. You need to say if it, the type and the name, of course, of, for example, you have a theory, you work on gravitational topology or something else, you have a medicine, you found some cure in a disease, you would describe that kind, and then you have some questions depending on the type of the result. You can describe also if it is a key exploitable result. So here, of course, I would again try to attract your attention because we see sometimes people tend to overuse this because to emphasize the importance of the result. But you have to think, is it going to be exploited? I mean, is it going to the market? Because, I mean, key exploitable result, of course, a key result, important result, it can be in any case, but you have to also check if it is going to the market, if it is something that has, let's say, the capacity of potential of going to the market. Now, there is also another table that is another obligation in the grant agreement of Horizon Europe. So for specific type of results, for example, if you develop a product, in that case, you will need also to fill in the results ownership list. I will show in detail what it is in the next slide. But just to describe here, the aim of that is a result to have an owner that can also be contacted and be helped to further promote the dissemination, exploitation of that result. Now, we have also another table which is called other results, in which case we have the types that we mentioned before, software, workflow, protocol, or other. So examples could be that, let's say that you develop a medical device and then you could also have publications later describing it, you could have a patent, but in the section of results you would put, I have a product, and you put the name of this, let's say, device. Now, you could also have a scientific theory, in which case you just describe the name of the theory of scientific finding, and then you also choose theory. Or you could also have a prototype. You will also select that it is a prototype, and in this case, you can also add the specific prototype in the other results table. Here is what it looks like. So you enter the result, the type of the name of the result. You enter what exactly it is. For example, it could be a product. If it is a product, you go to the results ownership list later until the last periodic report. You should agree between yourself that it could be one of the beneficiaries, or it could be a joint for all the consortium ownership of the result. And also in cases where you have specific categories of result like a product, you will probably need to answer some questions concerning, let's say, the potential or the exploitation activities that you plan to take. Now here is the new also table that focuses on the other type of results. So you could also, we are asking you also, in case you have produced software or a prototype or something else, to also submit it, for example, electronically. In most of the cases, there are repositories for developing software. You will put also the link to the repository, and also some other metadata which are describing what type of license you used, and whatever is relevant for as metadata for that. We also have this was also existing in Horizon 2020. You need, in case you have data sets produced by the project, unless there is an exception, for example, if it is very sensitive or something else, you need to provide the data sets. Here again, this existed. In order you have a patent or something else, you can introduce it, the IPR, not only a patent, of course, a trademark or something else, we ask you to provide. In case you have already received a reference from a national or European authority, you can enter the exact reference code, and we can retrieve the metadata. In case there is an embargo period, you can also flag for that. And there will be a period that is, for example, confidential. Now, there is a table for standards. This existed also with the change in Horizon Europe. But here we describe also activities relating to a standard, because we think we found out that sometimes to develop totally a standard for a project it might be less frequent, but we also wanted to cover here all the activities that are, let's say, contributing to creating the standard. So, and then we have the impact questionnaires, which are some policy questions. For example, they concern you will need to answer them. They are easy. If they are not relevant, you can always select not available. You need to describe the technological readiness of the project, the contribution to the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which is a set of, let's say, activities by the United Nations concerning the contribution, for example, to clean air, to clean water, to reducing poverty. The citizen engagement, which is also an important factor in case you have included, for example, people in defining the requirements or doing some testing or anything, you need to define the citizen engagement and where it applies, concerning for the beneficiaries. Then we have some other questions which concern a short description of how your project contributes to the policy, for example, the societal or the economic, let's say, impact of your project. Then some questions which will help us to estimate how your project, let's say, achieves, for example, if you are going to maintain some of the people who are working for the project, even after the project, with the help of, let's say, the exploitation of these results. If you will use some funds from other sources to support your project, if you will launch a dedicated company, a spin-off or a spin-out, and then some questions concerning what you found that helped you in the project or, let's say, was a hindering factor. And then we go to describe in brief also the submission of the periodic module. So when the time comes, you will receive a notification. All the beneficiaries will contribute to the technical part. They will have to complete the financial statement, and then the specific role that you have assigned for your project to sign the financial, let's say, statements, the project financial signatory will have to sign them, and then the coordinator will accept and aggregate all the contributions and will submit, and the EU officers will accept or ask you to do some kind of, let's say, changes. So what is the difference in short between periodic and continuous reporting? So the tables are common. So you can add, as the project continues, you can add, for example, publications, you can add results, you can submit. This will be also visible in the relevant section of the periodic reporting. So there is a synchronization. So you don't have to wait the periodic reporting to open to submit the tables, but you can already start filling the publications, the summary, and everything else from the continuous reporting. These two modules, they have synchronization. And then the periodic, in addition, it has the financial statement and the technical part you will need to submit at that moment. The technical report that we described, you will find it when the periodic reporting opens. You will have an additional tab where you can download the template, and there you need to provide answers to specific questions concerning how you have advanced, if you had deviations from the description of action. And of course, there you just need to be concise and avoid repetition with other things that are covered by, you don't mean, for example, to reference to publications, which are in another table in the structures part. So once you submit, every participant will, every beneficiary will complete their technical part, and then the coordinator will accept, or they can send to draft to ask you to do some changes. They will, at the end, considering that everything is completed, they will accept and include to create all the contributions. The same will happen also for the financial reporting. So there is a section only periodic reporting available. You have to contribute your financial statement and for the costs. In some cases here, when you enter the financial statements, for example, in the personnel costs or in other areas, you see there are some tabs which are editable. You can put the number, but then there is also a link where you will be asked to provide some further additional explanations. We have put here the link how you can complete your financial statement easily. And for example, here in the case of personnel costs, you will be required to split the person months per work package It's an additional information. The amount will be put here, but then you have to also provide some additional information by clicking here. And then once you complete the financial statement, its beneficiary will sign and submit. Then the coordinator will merge all and accept and submit. Until the moment you submit them, they are visible only to you, the financial statement. From the moment you submit, all the consortium will be able to see the financial statements submitted. Now there is a small here addition, although we refer to actual cost grants. In case of a lump sum grant, the reporting will be a little different because you don't have to submit detailed action, detailed cost per category, per cost category, but you are paid based on the work package, and you have to declare the amount of completion. For example, if it is completed 100%, and this of course is accepted by the reviewers and the beneficiary, you will be paid totally for that. If not, you can declare to what amount you completed the actions described for that work package. And the financial statement in that case will be automatically generated. And then for the approval process, just to conclude, once you submit, it is reviewed by the project officer. If it is, it could be, in some cases, rare, it could be rejected. So in that case, it opens again to draft. You have to again do the corrections. You could just be requested to upload, to provide additional information, in which case you need to upload a document with the requested information that is missing. You can still, after you receive the payment, you can still submit observations, or you can just select to close without observations. And in that case, you will also receive the final position. So once you submit you receive the first payment, and then you submit, for example, without observation, you will receive the final payment letter. In case there were interim payments and you have submitted, let's say, observation, it could be that you receive some accepted correction, which will be requested in the next financial statement. Or in case of final payment, it could be resulting in a complementary payment. And with that, I conclude. Thank you, and we will go for your questions.
Thank you very much, Petros. We go now for the questions, and for the legal part, we have our two colleagues that we had before, Angelique and Selene, who are joining us via Teams. I imagine they are still there. So the first question, personnel costs. In an 18-month report period, a person works for the beneficiary for 3 years, but only works in the project from month 10 to 18. How should daily rate be calculated? That's probably a legal question, if Angelique and Selene are there.
Reporting period would be for 18 months. So under Horizon Europe, you may have noticed, if you have already involved in a project, that simplification has been introduced regarding the declaration of personnel costs. Now there is a corporate formula which is applied to all type of cost with some adjustments. So the corporate formula is, I would say, relatively simple. The personnel cost corresponds to the days equivalent worked on the action by the person, multiplied by the daily rate. And this daily rate must normally be calculated per reporting period and per person, notably by using the actual personnel cost for this person, which are registered in the accounts of the beneficiary during the months within the reporting period. So in this specific case, this would mean that the beneficiary will have to use the amounts recorded in the accounts for this 18 months reporting period. And then to calculate more specifically the daily rates, you will see in the annotated grant agreement under the Article 6.2 that for each type of personnel cost, you can follow what is specifically detailed here, and then you will have to multiply by the actual time worked on the action.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Tiziana Rolando. Could you please clarify how to report personnel costs? Our legal colleagues, maybe?
I think we explained already. Maybe this question came earlier, but I don't know what else we could add.
So nothing else to add. We go to the next question then. Is the coordinator in any way responsible or accountable for the timesheet of beneficiaries? Correctness, quality, eligibility?
No. I mean, the beneficiaries have the responsibility. Maybe it's a legal question, sorry, maybe the colleagues can add, but no, the beneficiaries have their own responsibility for the their own people, so they don't. The coordinator does not have to verify something. You do not need to take extra actions.
Thank you. The next question
I
in
could
the
add something.
sorry.
Yes, from the legal perspective, I just wanted to ask that indeed the coordinator is not responsible, but there is a review obligation. So among the coordination task, the coordinator has to review the documents required by the granting authority. And this can mean to do a quality check in the sense of the documents are completed, are corrected, etc. So this is one of the tasks of the coordinator, but indeed, as Petros said, there is no obligation to verify, for instance, the eligibility of the cost declared, etc. But there is a quality check review in that sense.
Next question, in the reporting module, do associated partners need to fill in the table researchers involved in the project?
Well, yes, but as you know, associated partners do not have access, so it will be the beneficiary that associated partners can be linked to a specific beneficiary, or they can be to the consortium, in which case the coordinator will have to enter the information. But indeed, as we explained, it's not a control obligation, it is a policy, so I mean they can benefit also from the project, so we will just ask them, so I think you can do it, and this is the way to do it. But yes, the answer is yes.
Thank you. Equipment and depreciation. In some countries, national laws treat small pieces below 1,500 euros as consumables. No depreciation applies. What to do? And that's probably a legal question too.
Under Horizon Europe, to be eligible, your cost must comply with a series of conditions. The first series is the general condition, which are under your Article 6.1 of your grant agreement, and to comply with the specific cost eligibility condition, which is linked to this type of cost. And amongst this list of general conditions, one in particular is that your cost must be declared in line with the accounting standard which apply in the country where the beneficiary is established and with the beneficiary usual accounting practices. So this means that in here you have to follow what is prescribed under your national accounting practices.
Thank you. The next question, in the report, will the coordinator be able to see the researchers of the whole consortium in the researchers menu? It's very important as in the grant preparation.
Yes, to be honest, this is a change that was asked. I'm not sure if, I think maybe it will be even in production already, but we have directed this change. Actually, it was not possible for privacy reasons in the beginning. At the end, we saw that the coordinator really needed to see, let's say, errors or anything. And this change, if it is not already done, it will be soon in production. So, yes.
Thank you. Next question, can a coordinator withhold a certain amount of prepayment to partners to have a means at hand to encourage slow, non-performing partners to deliver on time?
This is a legal question, but I think normally no. Maybe.
Yeah, indeed. From the legal perspective, I would say that one of the obligations of the coordinator is indeed to distribute the payments to the other beneficiaries without unjustified delay. So the general rule is that no, this practice would not be possible. But of course, the consortium can always include any other means or any other provisions on how to tackle these situations in their consortium agreement, internal arrangements of the consortium. But From the perspective of the grant agreement, no, this would not be a practice that would be possible.
Thank you. Next question. I have submitted deliverables a few months ago. They have not been validated nor rejected. Is there a maximum time before the project officer accepts or rejects them?
Well, there is no, well, this is a, let's say, borderline case. I understand that you would like them to be reviewed, and of course, in general, the revision, let's say, of the deliverables has to happen at least when the time to report comes. So you will be paid with a report. I think that maybe in that case, although it must be exceptional, maybe the project officer needs the support from the experts, and they will organize a review when the project reporting period comes, the next reporting period. You don't have to worry. You can always contact your project officer, but indeed, I think maybe it could be linked that there is a kind of complexity. So your project officer will need to organize a formal review, and they will rely to the opinion of the experts.
Thank you, Petros. Next question. Do we have any information on when there will be a CFS model and rules ready for Horizon Europe? The legal people want to take this one?
Yes. For CFS, we mean certificates on the financial statements. This template is already available on the Funding and Tenders Opportunity portal. If you go under the Horizon Europe section and then you scroll until the section related to the templates and forms, you will find it here.
Very much. The data management plan template contains a section on the related costs. How can these costs be estimated and reported?
Well, I mean, these costs will probably be related to open access, let's say, data that you plan to foresee, because I mean, the data management plan concerns also the way that you plan to manage and exploit your data. I think this will be reported together with the publication costs. So, but you have a section, you know, I mean, this data management plan is different. It's not for financial reporting. So the question there is mostly for policy reasons and trying to calculate what are the amounts of money that are, let's say, focusing on this policy aspect. But you will probably report it together with all the publications or relevant costs.
Thank you. We are going for our time, but we will take 2 or 3 more questions. In the reporting module section, dissemination, there is a field to indicate budget dedicated to dissemination. How can this amount be calculated? Who wants to take this one?
Well, the dissemination cost, for example, it is if you organize a conference or something similar to that. This is it. I think the budget that you have to report. But as we had said, in most of the cases, because I don't know if you are referring mostly to Horizon 2020, because this now section has been revamped. So we don't. We ask you mostly to report on the dissemination activities rather than on the budget that you have spent for this reason.
Thank you. Next question. When will the indicative audit program for Horizon Europe be shared on the Funding and Tenders portal reference document?
This is maybe, I don't know if the legal colleagues know, but this is mostly for the Common Audit Service to reply. So
yeah. Indeed, this is related to audit matters, so we don't have sufficient information, but we know the indicative audit plan, it's ongoing. It will be a corporate one, meaning that it will apply to all directly managed EU-funded programs, so not only for Horizon Europe. And that's why it's taking a bit more time, but rest reassured that it will be there. It's work in progress and it's ongoing, but we don't have an estimated timeline, unfortunately.
Thank you very much. Next question. Please, could you explain clearly how to calculate daily rate for personnel costs in Horizon Europe? And that's a legal question, probably.
I think I would refer, because I mean it is not to be answered in 30 seconds, and here we have limited time, but it's not that we don't, maybe you could refer to the presentation that we have given, previous presentation, Coordinator Days. It was a presentation by Julian and our colleague Nicholas from DG Budge, and there they have explained in detail, so I think it was in the grant agreement preparation days, if I'm not sure if it was.
Yes, in December 2021, I think it was the presentation on personnel cost for Horizon Europe, where we explained clearly how we calculate this daily rate. But again, as my colleague Angelique said, we would refer you to consult the annotated model grant agreement, which is in the Funding Internet portal. And there you will find all the guidance related to the calculation of personnel costs. And of course, you have other webinars available dedicated to this topic.
Thank you very much. I think we should close here because we are a little bit late. So the next presentation is on mutual insurance mechanism. I think Mareike Impens, which is a colleague actually from the European Commission, the Directorate General for Research. She's a policy officer there. She should be connected via Teams. She was this morning. Mareike, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Hi. So we will try, because there's been so much information, and I have to say that all the information is important, but we are a little bit behind, so I'll try to be concise. So my name is Mareike Impens. I work in the designated service of the mutual insurance mechanism. What I will try to cover in this training or in this presentation is, can I have the next slide, please? So what I will try to cover is really, what is it, when did it start, why, and who participates. But let's just continue immediately. So what is the MIM? Well, some of you might actually know it as the Former Participants Guarantee Fund. So if you've participated in a grant agreement in one of the other or previous framework programs, you're familiar with the Participants Guarantee Fund. The MIM, or the Mutual Insurance Mechanism, is just replacing it. So it has absorbed the responsibilities of the Participants Guarantee Fund under the previous framework programs, and it is now just a new name, and it's called Mutual Insurance Mechanism. You can find everything about it in the rules for participation for Horizon Europe, and it's Article 37. As a short reminder, so that everybody is clear what we are talking about, the Mutual Insurance Mechanism purpose is to protect the financial interest of the EU budget. When did it start? As you could have guessed, it started with the FP7, so it already started in 2007, and it has actually been continued over the next two framework programs. The, how should I say, the grant agreements, or that part of the framework program that has been covered by the Participants Guarantee Fund or the Mutual Insurance Mechanism, it has expanded, as you can see in this slide. So why do we have a MIM, or a Participants Guarantee Fund? Why do we have it? Two main reasons. First of all, if we wanted small and medium enterprises and startups to be able to participate in our framework program, we had to get rid of these bank guarantees. Why? Because they're simply not available to an SME or to a startup. The other reason is really simplification. The entire administrative management of these bank guarantees for the thousands of grant agreements that we sign every year was, to put it mildly, a nightmare. So by doing away with those bank guarantees, it also simplified the administration and at the same time gave access to those small and medium enterprises and the startups. Now, who participates? As I said, who participates, that you can find in the Rules for Participation Horizon Europe in Article 37. But basically, any grant that was already covered by the former Participants Guarantee Fund, so that's before the rules of Horizon Europe were published. If you have a grant agreement that says it is covered by the Participants Guarantee Fund, it is still covered by the Participants Guarantee Fund. It has just changed name, and it is now called Mutual Insurance Mechanism. And of course, when you're going to sign now a new grant agreement, it will actually have articles where the MIM coverage is mentioned. So that is how you know that your action or your project is actually covered by the Mutual Insurance Mechanism. Okay, so who are we? Well, the mutual insurance mechanism has its own dedicated service. It's called the designated service. If you would like to read more about it, there is a mutual insurance mechanism commission decision, which was published in December 2021. If you want, you can go and have a look there. It's published in the official journal, so you can find all the information there on who's involved, who has which kind of responsibility. But mainly it is a dedicated service which comprises 3 people, myself and 2 other colleagues, and we have a non-official 4th person who has a higher rank within our hierarchy. But you do not deal with us directly. We are mainly a service that is there to assist all the other financial services within the different granting authorities. So as a coordinator, you communicate directly to your financial officer, to your project officer, and they are the ones that will assist you if you ever need an intervention or if there is any other issue. How does it work? We call it the CRI because there are 3 types of transactions that are happening. One is the contributions, the other one is the reimbursements, and the one that is that I hope you will never need is interventions. But let me explain. So, how does it work? Colleagues have already explained that once you've signed your grant agreement, there will be a first pre-financing payment. At the time of that pre-financing payment, 5% of your maximum grant amount will be deducted automatically. Those contributions, they are collected by the designated service, and they actually constitute what is the capital of the mutual insurance mechanism. That capital is then invested by the asset manager. This is not the designated service. These are specialized people. They're actually located in Luxembourg, and they invest the capital on the international financial market. So that is at the start of your grant management or your grant agreement. At the end, when you have reached the end of your project, there is of course the final payment or the payment of the balance procedure once you've done all the necessary reporting, of course, and provided the necessary certificates on financial statements. What happens then is that depending on the outcome of that calculation, that contribution will be paid in full back to the consortium, or it will be paid back to the granting authority, or it's a mix thereof. So to be very clear, when you receive your payment of the balance and you're entitled to the full payment of your maximum EU grant amount, you'll receive 2 transactions on your bank account. There will be a transaction directly from the granting authority to the bank account of the coordinator, and there will be a second transaction directly from the MIM bank account to the account of the coordinator. Okay, and then of course, so let me go back to the capital that is being invested by the asset manager. That capital, the purpose is of creating or generating interest, and it is with the interest that we pay the interventions, not the capital. Interventions. When do you need it? Well, you need it in case one of your beneficiaries, unfortunately, goes bankrupt or for whatever reason decides to terminate their participation, and for circumstances which can be legion, they cannot reimburse the pre-financing that you have paid to them as a coordinator. So there are two types of interventions. This might be a bit technical, but try to hang on. I'm almost finished. You have the indirect interventions, which means that whatever pre-financing or interim payment funds that you have lost, that you have tried as coordinator to recuperate, which the granting authority has asked the beneficiary to please reimburse to the consortium, whatever funding they've lost, there will be a payment from the mutual insurance mechanism to the bank account of the granting authority, and then there will be, depending on the decision of the granting authority, there could be another payment from the granting authority to the coordinator. Okay, the direct intervention, as the name says, it means that upon delivery and submission of a complete intervention request file, that the MIM will actually pay directly to your account or directly to the coordinator. Okay, the indirect intervention, when can it happen? Well, basically at any time during the life cycle of the grant agreement. There are a few conditions, but I do not want to get it too technical. I just want to explain mainly the principle. What happens is that the beneficiary must be terminated, and the colleagues have explained that termination requires an amendment of your grant agreement. So that is what, after the beneficiary has been terminated, only afterwards, and certain articles in your grant agreement will actually mention when you're entitled to receive an intervention. So when the termination has happened, it's only afterwards that a possible intervention can occur. In the case of an indirect intervention, what will usually happen is that your granting authority will issue a debit note against the terminated legal entity, and they will try to receive or recuperate the funding that was lost to the consortium first themselves. And in case that doesn't happen, then they will request the mutual insurance mechanism to reimburse the money that was lost. Okay, the direct intervention, yes, is conditional. The direct intervention is conditional on what? Well, first of all, the action must be ongoing. Your beneficiary must be terminated, but not just terminated. You need an actual signed amendment terminating that beneficiary. This may not make sense now, but once you're in the process, I'm sure that your financial officers and project officers, they will assist you and they will guide you to make sure that you have the proper amendment in place. And the third, the very important condition is, of course, that the remaining beneficiaries of the consortium, they agree to continue the action as it was intended at the submission of the proposal, so that the action, the core of the research project, does not change. Now, this might happen because you are going to redistribute the tasks amongst the remaining consortium members. It is also possible that you might add a new beneficiary. But just remember, the direct intervention, where the mutual insurance mechanism will pay any lost funding directly to the coordinator, is conditional. But if this situation occurs, please contact your financial officer, contact your project officer, and make sure that you have all the necessary documents in place so that this can happen. Because, of course, the MIM, or the mutual insurance mechanism, is to protect the EU budget, but the idea, of course, of the entire mechanism is because we want any project that we have selected for funding, that it can actually complete its action. Now, talking of having the necessary documents in place, it is important to remember that when you need an intervention, you will be requested to provide copies of bank statements. It means that despite the fact that when you do an amendment, you will be requested to fill in a document that says how much funds you have actually transferred to this legal entity. But this amount for an intervention to be able to take place will have to be justified with copies of bank statements. So we have had in the past cases where this information or these copies were difficult to obtain for our coordinators. So I just want to signal it here so that you are aware that please make sure that this information is available to you. And last but not least, that these transfers also carry a clear reference to the grant agreement or the project for which you are requesting an intervention, because we have also had cases where research institutes, universities, or even consultants, they have dealings with the same coordinator on multiple projects. And so when the transfers, the bank transfers, do not carry a clear identification, discussion might arise about how much exactly was transferred or paid to this termed beneficiary and for which grant agreement. Is it an EU-funded grant agreement, or is it for an entirely different contract which has nothing to do with the EU? So just drawing your attention to this. And I think that is all. That is all I have to say on the mutual insurance mechanism. Well, for now, there is much more that I could tell you, but I think I'd rather take your questions.
Yes, we have some questions for you. If I can see them on the screen, we can start with the first one. Where to find the online manual information about the steps to activate the mutual insurance mechanism via the system, and how long does the process to take?
Okay, so the coordinator, it's actually I wouldn't call it an automatic process. What happens is that when you do your termination and you do your amendment to terminate, that is the moment that you need to talk to your financial officer about an intervention. So that is how it happens. There isn't sort of like, how should I say, in the e-grant system in Compass, there isn't any button anywhere that will say, okay, I would like to launch an intervention. This is done via your granting authority.
Thank you very much. Next question from Asger. After the project closes and a beneficiary does not repay a claim from the EU, does the MIM cover this, or is the partnership then mutually and jointly liable?
Okay, when the project closes, I presume that they mean that the project has finished, there has been a payment of the balance, so there's been a final payment, and what happens is that one of the beneficiaries actually owes money to the coordinator. Okay, everything depends here on the outcome of the payment of the balance. It is possible that we have actually paid the maximum grant amount to the coordinator. In that case, it becomes an internal consortium issue. If, however, the outcome of the payment of the balance is negative, which means that the consortium needs to pay back funding it has received, then it could be that the coordinator actually replies when they receive the final payment letter saying, sorry, but this is actually funding that one of the other beneficiaries should pay back. In that case, certain transactions, this is within our accounting. Again, I don't want to become too technical. Certain transactions will be cancelled and a debit note against that specific beneficiary can be issued. And that one, if not reimbursed by that specific beneficiary, can then be covered by the MIM. But this is really on a case-by-case basis to be assessed. And it is assessed in the first instance by your financial officer or the granting authority, and then it is assessed also by the designated service. So there is no clear yes in all cases answer here.
To interrupt. Thank you very much. Next question. Does the MIM cover the impact of inflation on expenses and, in some countries, wages, like in the Belgian system of wages indexation to inflation?
Okay, let's be clear. You have signed a grant agreement, you have an estimated budget, you submit financial statements, and then they are either accepted in full, certain costs are rejected. So what the MIM covers is the costs, or how should I say, what the MIM covers is the difference between pre-financing you have received and costs which have been accepted. And if there is a, how should I say, there's a difference between these two, so you have received too much funding and you need to return it. If you are, for whatever reason, there might be multiple reasons, liquidation, bankruptcy, there might be other reasons, you cannot return this money either to the granting authority or to the consortium, then this difference, that is the difference that the MIM is covering. So it has nothing to do with inflation. It's about costs you've submitted and contribution accepted or awarded.
Next question. In case of termination due to liquidation, who claims a refund from the terminated beneficiary or liquidator if payment was made, the EC or the coordinator?
Well, I would say it is both. As a coordinator, colleagues have already explained, you have a very specific role within the consortium. So when one of your consortium members goes into bankruptcy, liquidation, it is your first duty to make sure that you make a calculation of how much funds they were entitled to receive and how much you've paid already to them. And then it is your duty as coordinator to claim those funds back first, either directly from the legal entity or from the liquidator, okay? If there is no response, or they inform you, sorry, we cannot pay this back, then you need to inform your granting authority immediately so that they can take the necessary actions, because they will then, on behalf of the commission or your granting authority, they will then claim or lodge a claim with the liquidator, and they will make the necessary actions, issue a debit note, either initiate immediately a intervention, a direct intervention or an indirect intervention, but they will take the necessary actions. But as a coordinator, it is first your own responsibility, and only then it is the granting authority's responsibility.
Thank you very much. We are going with a few more questions. If a partner has received more payments than its accepted costs and needs to reimburse the coordinator but cannot, does the MIM intervene with no commission cost claim?
Yes, I would say this is exactly the classical case that we are dealing with for interventions.
Next question from Asger again. Thank you, Asger. If, say, an audit 2 years after project closures raises a claim against a bank which is not paid, does the MIM cover this, or is the partnership liable?
Okay, so first of all, if an audit, so if a debit note is issued against one of your consortium members 2 years after the project is finished, first of all, the consortium is not liable. It is the legal entity that has been audited that is liable to pay that debit note. And no, that debit note is not covered by the mutual insurance mechanism.
Thank you. I think we have only 2 more questions. So is an intervention necessary anytime a beneficiary leaves the project and a new one comes on?
No, not necessarily. If one beneficiary leaves and all is arranged, you have, as coordinator, you have said, okay, beneficiary, the one that is leaving, you're entitled to 100,000 euros, whereas I've paid you 120,000. You can ask that beneficiary to pay the 20,000 back to the coordinator, to the consortium, and then the coordinator can just pay the 20,000 to the new beneficiary that is being added. So it is not necessarily or not necessary to request for an intervention if everything goes as planned, I would say, or if people actually respect their liabilities towards the consortium.
Thank you. And the last question, is the intervention also valid for EASI or AMIF project?
Oh, I have to admit, these two acronyms, they are new to me, so I don't recognize them. But it's very easy to double check. Just look in your grant agreement that you have signed or the model grant agreement you will be asked to sign. And there you can just search for the word mutual insurance mechanism. And that will be your quickest way to figure it out. But it is fair to say that not all EU funding, especially indirect managed projects, they're very often, again, I have to speak with two words here because projects that are covered by the MIM have increased, initiatives have increased that are covered by the MIM, but I would say that the easiest way to double check for any person is to have a look at the model grant agreement you will be requested to sign.
Perfect. And a very last question that just came up. What if a partner does not submit its CFS, although mandatory, does the MIM intervene?
Okay, so this is linked to, this is actually the financial authority who will calculate if a certificate on financial financial statements is not submitted. They will actually establish what we call, they will establish the debt. So they are the ones that will actually say how much costs are accepted. And based on the information from the coordinator of the amount of pre-financing or interim payments received, they will actually say, okay, this is the debt of this specific legal entity. Yeah, so it's, again, it is not a one cut or sort of a reply that I can give saying yes.
Thank you very much, Mareike, for the questions and for the presentation, of course. So we are going to close here, but before I just want to mention that about the webinars we are organizing on Horizon Europe and also a little bit on Horizon 2020, but of course less and less. As you know, we have these meetings with these webinars regularly, so you are always welcome to participate, to attend. It's always free, no problem whatsoever. Almost never you have to register. And we always publish them about 3-4 weeks in advance in the Funding and Tenders portal. You can see them under news and also under events. In addition, under events, you have all the previous webinars we had, both on Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe since 2021, I think. So there you have not only the recording, but presentations, additional material, whatever you have. Whatever you need is there. So we encourage you to follow them. Hope to see you again here. And just before leaving, I want to thank all the participants who have been here answering questions and doing the presentations. From the technical side, we had Dominika Kotowicz, who was managing Slido. And here in the studio, we had, from the technical part, Béa Depré and Olivier Margan, who is in addition the one who is publishing actually all these trainings in the Funding and Tenders portal. Finally, I just want to thank you for attending, for staying until the very end, and hope to see you next time. Have a nice day.
Thank you, bye.